Okay, I clicked on the live button, and we are live also right now. Okay, so this was a little long in happening. We had some technical difficulties, folks. But welcome to the In-Depth Show. My guest for tonight is Shareef Snuggs, a Medicare for All activist extraordinaire. And he's requested this special show to talk over the MMT conceptual framework and the MMT approach to economics. As I'm sure you know by now, Shareef is certainly one of the major organizers of the Medicare for All March on July 24th. And now he is working hard on the submission to the United Nations to get our country, the United States of America, cited for human rights violations because they don't have a Medicare for All program.
Yeah.
And that, I'm sure, is an immense amount of very hard and detailed work.
Yeah.
I am certain that is the case.
Very tiring.
Very, very tiring. But I'm very grateful that he wanted to come on to talk about the MMT paradigm. So at this point, Shareef, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to get rid of this promo so people can really see us as well as hear us. And anyway, please ask me anything you would like to ask me, and I will do my best.
Yeah, no. The major issue too. I think you know from the last time I was on your show, is that I'm new to activism, and so I see so much of the Twitter battles online, and I'm pretty sure you've definitely been in some of them yourself. Like this, I guess beef, for lack of better words, between the MMT community and I guess the states led fight for healthcare, and I'm concerned, or I would say I don't understand why is that a problem. Like, so for example, if I was a state-led organizer, I'm pushing for my state to have healthcare, why would that negate the MMT argument, or why would that stop? Why would MMT not work with state-led issues? Why would that not be an issue? We're all one country. If the United States government did step in, because I guess the argument is that MMT is just for national. This is the understanding that I'm getting from people online. This is why I want to be educated. That won't work, right? This is what they say. That won't work for a state-led fight. But if we're all one country, if the group of organizers in this one particular state lobbied for it and got their state to get a single-payer system for that particular state, why would that hurt the rest of the country? Why would that not make sense?
Okay, so I'll be happy to explain that.
Right, of course. Yeah.
Okay, I'll be happy to explain that. But I'll start by saying that it's not a question of MMT working, or not working, because what MMT is its conceptual framework. Mm-hmm. It's full of concepts, definitions, essentially ways, of looking at things, propositions. It has some theories in it. It has some value judgments in it as well. Although there are many MMTers who would claim that it's value-free or, value neutral. Mm-hmm. That is not one of my claims in terms of my understanding of MMT based on the literature. But the important thing to note is that it's a framework. It's a framework for description. Mm-hmm. It's a framework to explain things that happen in the macro economy, actually, primarily.
And I want to apologize too if, like, a lot of your guests I'm pretty sure they've heard this from you like hundreds of times. But I seriously want to talk about like what is the overall like public goal, like what is the baseline, not just understanding, but like why would that how let's walk the average American through. Like I'm new to this as well, but like why would that why would that make sense? Like based on understanding, I guess, the monetary theory in regards to how a country pays for things. Why is that something that the average American needs to know? Because we always talk about the argument of like, how are we going to pay for it? Or, I'm pretty sure you saw the article today that Israel just got an extra $1 billion for, military bullshit that they're doing over there.
Yeah.
And now our current military budget is like 146 billion. So like we have all the money in the world for this. So let's, I'm curious, like, what is the basic understanding that we need to know as Americans when we talk about the federal budget? Like, why is that a complicated, complicated issue?
Okay, it's not that it's a complicated issue, it's that there is a lot, of disagreement about it because people have different interpretations about how federal funding occurs. Okay, but first I want to finish my first point because it's an important one. Okay, it's an important one. It's not a question of MMT not working, or working. Okay, it's a question of when you use MMT to see the economy, to see certain aspects of politics, to see the world, you're looking through a particular paradigm, or lens. So when we talk about things working, or not working, what we're really talking about is whether things that are somehow based on that lens, policies that are somehow based on that lens, going to work,
right?
Or not going to work. But it's not the thing itself, that's working. The thing itself, is a body of knowledge. The thing itself, is an approach to economics. So it's really the policies that might be successful, or not successful. And people will claim the policies are based on MMT, but the policies might not be based on MMT. They might be based on a strange interpretation, of MMT, or they might be making a mistake in, their interpretation, of MMT. So those things are important to know. Now, what you expressed was a concern about the funding, how federal funding is understood, in the MMT world. And I want to answer that question because that is a very fundamental question. I'll start by talking about how we understand funding in states. The way we understand funding in states or cities is that the cities or the states or companies, or even ourselves, before we can spend money, we have to get that money. States get it, and cities get it by taxing, or maybe by selling things to people, selling certain services to people, getting money in return. Then basically, those entities turn that money around and they spend it on things like social services, but things like cops, things like firemen, teachers, and so on. All the various things that states and cities are going to spend on roads, to some degree. Okay, but they have no way of creating money.
Right.
So their spending is constrained. It's constrained on the money they can gather from the rest of us, including the federal government.
Right.
Taxing is very important to them, for that reason. Now, it used to be thought, and it used to be true when the country was on the gold standard, that it was not free to create money, okay, at that point.
Right.
The money that it created was constrained by the amount of gold, okay, it had in some way. I mean, it might not have been fully backed by gold, maybe backed by gold to the extent of 10% or something like that, but was constrained by the quantity of gold which was backing the currency. Okay. In 1971, during the war, okay, in Vietnam, there was a run on our gold by the French.
Wow.
And they were basically threatening to create such a deep run on the gold of the United States that the president, specifically Nixon, who was president at the time, thought, hey, we're going to run out of money for this war in Vietnam.
Right.
So we got to do something. And somebody advised him that, well, Franklin Roosevelt in 1933 stopped the conversion of dollars to gold. He closed the gold window domestically, so people would not be able to trade their dollars for gold, because the United States was running out of gold then also.
Right.
Okay.
Didn't Lincoln do something like that too?
No, what Lincoln did was, well, he did to some extent. Specifically, he printed the greenbacks.
Right.
He printed the greenbacks to support the war. He did that, yes.
Right.
And it was a very successful maneuver.
Right.
Okay. So
we have a history of just printing money when we just want to. So basically,
we have a history of going back and forth. We print money when we want to, and we constrain ourselves because we go from time to time on a gold standard or a silver standard or something like that to to back our money. Whenever we've been on a gold standard, we've been subject to periodic recessions and serious depressions. Okay, and that's because people speculate in gold, and they speculate in private money. Okay, and then when there are crashes, but the government is constrained and isn't able to bail out the economy or stop downward trends, okay, in the economy. So following the Civil War, we went on the gold standard for some years. And it was Franklin Roosevelt who took us off the gold standard domestically in 1933. But we still kind of remained on the gold standard actually through the Depression. Then for the Second World War, we went completely off the gold standard. Okay. And then at the end of the Second World War, we kind of went back on the gold standard. The rest of the world was kind of on a dollar standard back then. Had a conference that was called the Bretton Woods Conference in 1945. And the United States, of course, was the only major country left standing, okay, at that time. And so the rest of the world looked to us to establish hard currency. And we set a fixed price of conversion of dollars to gold in international trade. And I forget whether the standard at that time was $16, okay, for an ounce of gold, or $32. But anyway, by 1971, it had gone up to $32. Okay. And so people, not people here domestically, but other nations were able to get 1 ounce of gold from us for $32. Okay.
Wow.
And that was really starting to put stresses on the gold we had in Fort Knox. And we weren't able to mine, a sufficient amount, okay, of additional gold, okay, and, get it into Fort Knox, okay, to prevent the runs on gold which started to take place, because some of the other nations felt that our currency wasn't so solid because it was backed by gold. And when they got a lot of dollars, they decided to actually make a run, okay, on our gold supplies.
Could I ask a question there too?
He was advised, well, do what Roosevelt did in 1933. Close the gold standard for international trade.
Oh my God.
Okay. And he decided to close the gold window, so dollars could no longer be exchanged for gold. And that's when dollars in modern times became a fiat currency.
Right.
Not backed by anything except the economic strength of the United States, okay, and the legitimacy of the government.
Right.
And, the confidence people had in the dollar, okay, the soundness of the dollar. Now, technically, that gave the United States also the capability to create however many dollars we want to create without constraint. Okay. But many people did not realize this. They did not realize the implications of it.
Right.
And they still continue to operate as though we were on the gold standard, being very afraid of deficit spending, always wanting to impose some kind of austerity on the economy, basically balanced budgets. They were concerned especially about the debt to GDP ratio, because that was, supposed to be a stability measure, okay, of some kind.
Could I ask a question?
Please.
I was going to say, why do other countries, especially during that time, said to the United States, like, okay, this is cool. Let's be okay with that. Like, if they made the announcement, I'm assuming that other countries around that time, when they got off the gold standard, they understood what that meant, right? So why would
I don't think anybody completely understood what it meant.
Really?
Because when we went off the gold standard,
and keep in mind, I'm talking about not like the average like American citizens. I'm talking about world leaders. So I'm looking at from that perspective, from that lens.
Right, but the world leaders pretty much had a conception of how government finance works,
right,
which was similar to our conception of how our households work, or how our states work, or how our cities work.
Right.
So it was still all about constraint for them, and the idea that money was scarce. And a lot of nations were operating in such a way that they were pegging the value of their currency to the value of the dollar.
Right.
In other words, when the value of the dollar fluctuated, okay, on international exchanges, or international trade, they would try to maintain their peg to the dollar. Their currency was worth so much, okay, in terms of the dollar, and they would try to maintain that by buying more dollars in some way, or trading for more dollars, or trying to manipulate the value of their currency on the market in terms of a fixed value that they were trying to maintain to the dollar.
So, in other words, every other country besides the United States has restraint when it comes to money. We do not, because they just print money. We just print money. They do not.
No, because as time went on, in other words, technically what happened was when we went off the gold standard, so did lots of other countries.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Okay, now, they didn't necessarily act like they went off the gold standard, but the UK was off the gold standard at that time. But most of the nations of Europe were off the gold standard. Australia was off the gold standard. New Zealand, Japan was off the gold standard.
No, the
That's
reason I'm asking too, because like, why can't?
even Russia, even the Soviet Union was off the gold standard.
Because here's my thing: if United States can print money, right? What's stopping the UK, China, Russia, any country just print money? Okay, I'm just gonna print my own money. Problem solved. Here we go.
Okay.
Why
So-
can't they do that? Why can't they just do that?
Okay. Well, one reason why is because the nations of Europe decided to create something known as by Eurozone.
Mm-hmm.
And what the nations of the Eurozone agreed to was the idea that they would be governed in part by a European central bank, and that it was the European central bank that was going to have the power to issue money, create money, but no longer their individual governments. So they gave up their monetary sovereignty because they thought it would be beneficial to them to join this zone, okay, of nations.
Right.
Okay. So
the European banks, they print money whenever they want.
The UK can. It never joined up, okay, with the Eurozone.
Mm-hmm.
But still, it was treating itself, okay, as if it was on the gold standard. For example, sometime during the 1970s, they became very short, okay, of money. And they decided to borrow money on the international exchange when they had a perfect ability to create all the money they wanted to create, but they just didn't understand it. Okay, I think today they understand it, but they don't all understand it, okay, in the same way. And they also don't want the people in their country to understand it, because then it would be harder to impose austerity on them.
Right.
But I think there's more now than a dim sort of understanding, okay, among a lot of nations, that their central banks have the capability to create as much of their currency, okay, as they need in order to fulfill the obligations, okay, of the country involved.
Right.
Japan in particular is very sophisticated about this. They've been creating gobs and gobs of money from time to time since the 1990s, but they're also very odd about it.
Why is that?
Well, they're very odd in this sense. Okay, they create a lot of money to stimulate the economy, okay, in Japan. Okay, and then they get afraid, and they suddenly think, oh, we're creating too much money, we're going to have inflation. They have no hint of inflation there at all. But suddenly they stop spending money and they go on an austerity kick, and they push their nation back into a recession. And they've been going through cycles like this.
Wow.
But since the 1990s, I think now there are many economists over there, who are beginning to realize that the kinds of deficits, okay, that you run have more to do with something called the sectoral balances than they have to do, okay, with anything else. And that it's quite possible that your sectoral balances will develop in such a way that you should be running deficits year after year after year after year in order to compensate for leakages of your currency out of the day-to-day economy. When I talk of leakages of currency, okay, I'm talking about basically two kinds. Okay, let's take the United States, okay, as an example. We run a trade deficit. Okay, technically, okay, it's called a current account deficit. So when you run a trade deficit, that means that you are importing more, okay, than you're exporting. That means more of your dollars are going to foreign countries who actually mostly take those dollars and invest them in treasury bonds, which actually sit at the Federal Reserve, So the money actually never leaves this country, but it's out of the domestic economy.
Right. That is
And
circulation.
it could amount to 2% of GDP per year or 3% of GDP per year. In some really good years, for people who have wanted to enjoy foreign goods, it's been 6% of GDP or 7%, okay, of GDP, really big numbers.
Right.
Okay, so that's a leakage of currency, but going out of the domestic uh, economy and going into an idle state. Then there are also people, corporations, of course, entities inside of the economy who wish to save. And when they save, that goes into a bank, and it's not a part of the everyday trading in the economy either.
Mm.
So let's say that in one particular year, people want to save 6%, okay, of GDP. And they also want to have trade deficits, okay, to the tune of 6%, okay, of GDP. That means 12% of GDP inside of the economy is falling into idleness.
Mm.
So it's not contributing to the circulation of dollars into the economy and the multiplier effect. And it's not really being used to keep a state of full employment in the economy and to keep, the economy really booming. Okay. So that could be a cause of our going into a recession. If that keeps on happening, okay, that could be a cause, okay, of our going in.
Yeah, that's another issue that I actually have too. If all these countries can print money, right, why is there so much recession?
Because they don't print money. Okay, because they're still having the outlook of the gold standard. It's nearly 50 years later.
Right.
But these countries still act as if they need a balanced budget, as if they have to worry about the size of the debt, the size of their debt, okay, the size, okay, of the debt to GDP ratio. That's been a standard among conventional economists for a very long time. That if you want to be fiscally responsible, you must not have a debt to GDP ratio that is too high. In fact, a few years ago, back in 2010, a famous study was done by two economists who were very popular with the ruling class. And they showed that it was dangerous to get a debt to GDP ratio of greater than 90%, because that was going to stunt your growth, okay, as an economy, basically. And they did a quantitative study, and they thought their results actually showed that. Now, there are a number of reasons why it didn't. It was later found they had made some spreadsheet errors, stuff like that, and the whole study was bunk. Okay, but basically, it really scared a lot of countries at that time, and they were getting worried because their debt to GDP ratios were going so high. And it was all very strange because the Japanese at the time were running like a debt to GDP ratio of 220%, and they weren't having any problem at all.
I got another question. It's going to circle back to the whole purpose of the podcast today, because I know a lot of people are probably watching this like, where's Dr. Joe Firestone getting to? What if other countries started to act that way? What would you think would have most likely happened? Your prediction. I mean, no one really knows. But let's say other countries started to say, hey, we can just print our money if we wanted to, like the United States. Let's just do it. What do you think the worst thing or the best thing that could happen?
Okay, well, let me frame it in this way. If nations with healthy, strong economies were to do that in sensible ways, in other words, in ways that did not lead to inflation in their economies, that did not lead to structures that were too hierarchical in their countries, okay, in ways that led to a greater amount of productivity in the economy, then it would be all good.
Mm-hmm.
Because also, it's not appropriate for all nations to be doing deficit spending. It's only appropriate, okay, if nations have a situation where they have high leakages of savings and high leakages of currency to foreign trade. But there are many nations that are running trade surpluses and some very substantial trade surpluses. Okay, and that means they're gaining money, okay, from other countries that they can use, okay, in trade. And if they gain enough money,
Mm-hmm.
then it makes sense for them to be running a domestic surplus and not to be printing any more money.
Right.
Okay, so in other words, there are some countries that it would be appropriate for them to run surpluses and not to do deficit spending, and their economies would go along fine.
Mm-hmm.
But then certain other countries that had a trade balance which was not favorable should be doing a sufficient amount of deficit spending to compensate for their loss for the freezing of their net financial assets
Mm-hmm.
in savings and the loss of their net financial assets to foreign trade.
Mm-hmm.
Government deficit spending is about compensating for those kinds, okay, of losses, so you can create an economy that has full employment in it and that also has price stability in it at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Those are twin, very, very important goals, okay, in economics. There are major goals in the MMT formulation also, but there are a lot of other goals in the MMT formulation because MMT economists tend to talk a lot about the public purpose, okay, of countries. And when they think some about the public purpose, they soon come upon many, many possible consequences, okay, economic policies, the side effects, okay, of economic policies. And we can go through a list, okay, of the dimensions of public purpose, okay, if you want to do that.
Sure.
They turn out to be very broad. Okay, if you want to do that, I can take a few minutes to do that.
No, yeah, sure. I was going to ask another question before you do that too. Like, it's find it fascinating that all these other countries still operate it as if they need to, if they need to like hold their budget to like some restraint, or like still believe that we still live in a gold standard world. It's very interesting that they still operate that way. And I would like to pick, I wish I was able to pick their brains and to say, hey, have you never read Stephanie Kelton's book, The Deficit Myth? You don't know how the United States government works. It's very fascinating to me that they're kind of like out of the loop in that regard.
Okay, so the ideas, okay, of MMT started to circulate in 1994 and about 95.
Oh, wow. So MMT is relatively new in a sense.
Yes, it's relatively new in a sense. But it has taken a quarter of a century for those ideas to really get out there because the resistance from conventional economics was really, really strong. It was hard to get into the journals. Of course, it was hard to get into the news outlets. Okay, when we began to get started, to get into the news outlets, I mean, it was wall-to-wall ridicule, total ridicule all the time. It was very, very hard to make a dent in it. In 2010, there was a conference. Okay, it was called the Fiscal Summit, and it was run by the Peterson Foundation, okay, in this country. And they were in league with the President of the United States, coordinating very closely, okay, with the President of the United States, trying to give him a justification for austerity budgeting here, okay, in the United States. they held a big, expensive conference, okay, in Washington, D.C., supported by the Peterson Foundation, which had recently got, okay, an investment from Peter G. Peterson, okay, of $1 billion, okay, to support their views, okay, of
What?
economics. Huh?
That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah, well, that was something. Well, he was very successful in the markets in the early years, okay, of the century, and he made a killing, got $2, $3, $4 billion, and so he decided he was in his own way a very public spirited individual, and he decided to take the 1 million of his gains and invest them in this particular foundation that was going to be basically austerity mongers. So, he wanted to have this conference in Washington. And on April 9th, was it April 9th or April 7th? I forget, of 2010, I happened to see this article in the American Prospect, which was announcing this conference. And I had just come into learning the basics, okay, of MMT, okay, at that time. And I said, what baloney? We have to counter this. We have to counter this. So in roughly 20 days or so, in other words, that conference was scheduled for April 28th of 2010. In 20 days or so, we put together a full day conference to rival theirs, okay, at George Washington. We had no money. We basically crowdfunded it, came up with $5,000 to get some people there. Some of the other people came, okay, on their own. Our conference was an all MMT conference. It was called the Fiscal Sustainability Teach-In Counter Conference. And the videos from that conference are still available, on YouTube today. But many of the major figures in MMT were there at the time. Warren Mosler was there, Bill Mitchell was there, Stephanie Kelton was there, by Randy Ray, Pavlina Chernyeva, and by Marshall Auerbach. Those were the MMT people who were there. And they got tremendously vigorous Q&A all throughout the whole day with the audience. It was a very, very exciting conference. But it was the first exposure of MMT in Washington, D.C.
Right.
That particular conference. And that started something because it got a lot of other people involved and gave them some more publicity. And then some people at Columbia University picked up the ball and they ran some very good conferences there. And from there, modern monetary theory started to spread.
Why is it a theory? Why is it called a theory when literally we are now on a standard? So I'm curious about that because we literally just print money. So how is that?
Right.
There's no theorizing in that regard.
Okay. There's a term, okay, in academia, which applies to systems, okay, of thought. And the term theory is really applied then to conceptual frameworks.
Okay.
And to systems of thought. People also speak, okay, of neoliberal theory.
Right.
Sometimes. And they can also speak of
neoliberalism isn't a theory, but we can go there. We don't have to go there.
Well, it has theoretical propositions in it. It's a framework of thought, okay, as well.
Right.
Okay, and okay, so but MMT is a theory in that particular sense, but it's not a theory, okay, in the sense that Einstein's theory, okay, is a theory.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same sense.
Right. Got it.
Okay, so
what you're basically saying is considered a theory because there's a gray area in the way the government kind of just prints money, basically.
There are some theory propositions inside of the complex, okay, of MMT.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, but there are also many factual propositions inside, okay, of MMT, and there's disagreement over those factual propositions. For example, one thing, okay, there is disagreement on is what happens when federal taxes are settled. In other words, okay, the government collects taxes, okay, and then it deposits the tax revenues at the Federal Reserve. Okay, what happens then? Conventional economics thinks that, well, that's all very normal. Those deposits are credited to the Treasury spending account. Just like when you go to a bank, your deposits are credited to your account.
Right.
The MMT interpretation is different. The MMT interpretation says the Federal Reserve originally issued the money. Okay, so basically all the money in the economy right now was issued at one time or another by the Federal Reserve. Now, there are some small exceptions to that, okay, but basically, okay, the Federal Reserve.
Right.
Okay, so, since the Federal Reserve issued that money, when the money is deposited by the Treasury Department and gets back to the Federal Reserve, that liability of the Federal Reserve and the federal government is extinguished by the Federal Reserve. So
why is that a debate? Why is that a debate?
It's a debate because there's a theoretical element to it, and the theoretical element comes from the discipline, okay, of accounting. But from the accounting point of view, okay, if the money was issued by a particular entity, like the Federal Reserve, and the money is redeemed to the Federal Reserve, that extinguishes the liability. That is, the money itself is a liability. From the accounting point of view, right, it's a liability of the institution, okay, that issued it.
Right.
Okay? So that money is destroyed. So then there is an equivalent amount of money which is placed in the Treasury spending account, but it's not the money that was deposited. Instead, it's money newly created by the Federal Reserve Bank.
Right. I think the biggest issue for me, the reason why it's so confusing on my end, is because you print money. Where do you lose it? That's the hardest part for me to understand. Like, I don't get it. Like, you print money, so how are you at a loss? And especially if the money is coming back to you, right? The way you explained it. Again, how are you at a loss? Okay. I just don't understand.
Okay, so we can even of the accounting rules, as right, a matter of accounting, when you get your liability back, that liability is destroyed.
Right.
It no longer exists. Okay, and so this has to do a lot, okay, with accounting theory. And that's part of the theoretical part, okay, of MMT, because a lot of MMT is based on standard accounting.
Right.
In fact, it's one of the only approaches to economics which is based in large part on accounting. And that's one of the ways in which it's very different, okay, from other approaches to economics. It takes accounting seriously.
But my point is, how do we know, right? Because we don't know that the Federal Reserve Bank is using basic accounting. We can use theory all we want. We can say this is how money is supposed to be spent. This is based on the actual rule of accounting. But I can't imagine someone who has autonomy, because the Federal Reserve Bank has autonomy. There's no watchman over them. They can do whatever they want. So why are we applying a rule to them when they actually create the rule, or they actually print? You know what I mean? Like, there's no one stopping them from saying that I need to do this. There's no one putting a gun to their head. So why are we applying a rule to them
Well,
They
they're
don't have to apply
actually
to.
okay. I'm not going to say people are putting a gun to the head, okay, the Federal Reserve, but the Federal Reserve follows but certain business rules, okay, of its
Okay.
own. And those business rules, in part, okay, are dictated by the fact that but they are a bank and that they're authorized by Congress to do certain things, but not to do other things. For
Mhm.
example, they have an important constraint that Congress constrains them with. And that constraint is they cannot give credit to the Treasury Department.
Mhm.
Even though the Treasury Department is the most important customer, okay, at the
Right.
Federal Reserve, they cannot issue credit cards, okay, to the Treasury.
Right.
They cannot issue any loans to the Treasury. That's forbidden because Congress has decided that the central bank of the United States should not be monetizing the debt that is sold by the Treasury Department. The
But
Treasury.
isn't that semantics when the Treasury Department gets whatever they want anyway?
It's not completely semantics, and the reason why it's not completely semantics is because the Treasury Department and the Fed have to go through considerable gyrations to actually create the same effect
Mhm.
as would be created by monetizing the money in the first place. And that has certain social functions. It hides what's going on.
Right.
It allows people to continue to pretend that the federal government is just like a household.
Right. That's my point. Is like, who cares if the Treasury Department don't get a credit card? They can still, you're gonna get the money they want anyway. So okay. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah, it's fixed.
right,
That's it. It's
right,
entirely fixed. Like, for example, okay, when the Treasury Department has a bond auction,
right,
has a securities auction, you may hear constantly, oh, there's a bond market out there, and that it may be difficult for the Treasury Department to fulfill its needs, in this bond auction, because people may decide, no, we're not going to buy these particular securities.
right,
However, the Treasury and the Federal Reserve have rigged things so there are securities dealers,
right,
and there are 20 securities dealers, and most of them are big banks. And in order to be a securities dealers and to earn commission off the security transactions, you have to agree beforehand to buy your share of the bonds from the Treasury auctions. And it's fixed even to this degree, Shareef. Even to this degree, it's if, say, some bank or some dealer should plead, oh, we don't have the funds right now, then the Federal Reserve will lend them the money so they can fulfill their quota of purchases. Then when the 20 dealers get all these bonds and securities themselves, they turn that around and they sell it into the bond market. Then they earn transaction fees on that.
I think the American people need to start their own bank. That's what it sounds like. That's what you're saying. We need a bank. We need a healthcare bank for the working class. We need to create our own bank,
Okay.
and then we can tell. We can.
For,
I'm teasing. I'm teasing. I'm making a joke.
no. I am all for public banks created for particular purposes that are owned by the people. I'm all for that. It would be great to have a network of such
Right.
banks.
Right.
Okay, but there's one thing, okay, I want to emphasize,
Which is
and that is that the Federal Reserve Bank is the central bank of the United States. It was created by Congress. It is a public bank. But this business of talking about, its autonomy this, autonomy that, I mean, that's a fiction. That's been set up so the Federal Reserve can be particularly responsive to Wall Street.
right.
Now, we can do something about that without actually ending the Federal Reserve or changing its character, okay, at all. Mm-hmm. All we have to do is regulate the Federal Reserve, okay, in a different way and get rid of the fiction that it is independent, okay, and autonomous. No, it's not. It's a creature of the Congress of the United States. And in part, it's a creature of the executive branch also, because the executive branch is charged, okay, with appointing the chair of the Federal Reserve and with the people who go on to the Board of Governors, okay, in general.
But isn't that also like, in my view, is like they all work together. It's not like they're in bed together. It's not like, I know you say that Federal Reserve doesn't have autonomy, but like they work together. So there isn't a friction between how the Federal Reserve Bank wants to work and how Congress wants to work. There's a happy marriage. The way Wall Street wants to work with the way Wall Street works in that argument as well. Like there isn't anyone in Congress or in the Federal Reserve Bank like saying we need to fix things, and they're adamant about it. Like no, it's all a show. It's bullshit. You know what I mean? Like so, I hear what you're saying.
A happy marriage now. There's a happy marriage now because the politics is that way. But if, for example, something were to change quickly in politics and the Green Party were to get into power, they would definitely change the relationships of the Federal Reserve to the rest of the world. Because one of the things that they would do, well, one of the things that's in their platform, okay, that they intend to do is that they would wrap the Federal Reserve right under the Treasury Department.
You can't fix the mafia. The United States government, you can't fix Congress. You can't fix that. They're mafia. People gonna be mad at me. People gonna be mad when I say that, but I'm just saying, like, you just can't fix the system. I mean,
but I'm not going to be mad at you for saying that. But the point is, you obviously believe that we can fix certain parts of the government because that's why you're out there as an activist, but with respect to Medicare for all.
Well, to some degree, I do feel that we can have certain social programs can be done. I had a conversation with my buddy about this too. He was like, "You have such a disdain towards our government. Why do you feel active? Why do you feel you can actually make change in this space?" And I says, we're not asking for a lot. We're not asking for anything that other countries don't have already. And so me as an activist, I'm not going, to the government and saying, I want you to completely be different than what you are, because I know what they are in my personal view. All I'm asking is, how the 40% of Americans who have access to healthcare and who have healthcare, let's get the other 60%. Let's cover everybody. That's what I'm asking for. So you have the money to do that, because we're talking about this right now. We know you have the federal funding to do this. Let's not pretend we don't have the money, because you do, right? If you want to still be a mafia, you still want to bomb other countries. I'm not an activist for the end of damn wars, even though I am all about end of damn wars. My activism is 100% Medicare for all, but I'm not here I'm not dying on that particular hill. I'm dying on the hill for healthcare. So I'm literally pushing for that.
Right. But once you and we live on the hill for healthcare because we win,
right? What's
next? I mean, obviously it's going to be the Green New Deal.
No, it should be the Green New Deal. I hope I can retire after we get Medicare for all. I would hope so, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen because a lot of other activists, other organizers who are in other like social justice reform, Green New Deal, they're going to be looking for not just people like me, but not looking for me, but people like me to help them in that fight. So I don't think
Okay, so in spite of the fact that we know what this government is and we know how corrupt it is, and we know all about that,
right?
We still believe that we can change things. And why do we believe that we can change things? Because you have changes going on all throughout history.
Yes, that's true. I do believe that because we have changed all the history, but also too, like I feel like winning argument is that we have other countries that have what we don't have. So we know we have this American socialism here is so bad. We don't question why other countries have things that we don't have because we think that America's is better. We play a blind eye to that, and I question people in my neighborhood, people in my communities, and I ask them that too all the time. I'm getting better at that too, actually, asking my neighbors, like, do you know that this country has access to healthcare? It's not a problem for them. Is that an issue for you? Is that it concerns you that we're the richest country in the world? And some people say yeah. Some people say yeah. Some people say, but what's their budget? What are they spending other money for? I was like, but that's irrelevant. Like I get into conversations with people like that. I was like, that's relevant. Like, why does that matter? That particular government found a way to say, you know what, we're going to make sure we cover all our citizens. Who cares of how they did it? That's irrelevant. They did it.
Yeah, and that means people don't die in those countries because they have a lack of insurance. But people don't go bankrupt,
right,
in those countries due to medical debt.
Right.
There's no medical debt,
right,
literally, okay, in those countries.
Right, and it's funny to me too. I find it funny, like more so as now that I'm an activist. When I talk to people, is like no one cares about spending that the government already does. They only care about spending that the government don't do. So in other words, so if I say like, oh, like the United States government spends X amount of dollars for military spending, and it's like, well, what do they need? What do they need to do that? That's the argument. What do they need to spend? Well, that's the budget. What do they need? And I said, well, why don't they put some of that money towards healthcare? Well, we can afford to do that because we're spending this for this. But who are we going to war with? Why do we need so much money? Like, they don't ask that question. That's not a concern for them. Like, they only start asking budgetary questions when they talk talking points that don't make sense to them or talking points they've heard on mainstream media. Like, oh, we can afford this. But no one ever questions, like, okay, why is the military budget $146 billion? No one questions that. Like, why? No one says, it's fine. It's okay. Let them spend it.
Okay, so to change the subject, just a second, but it's not really changing the subject because it's about MMT.
Right.
Okay. We are now being beset by multiple crises at the same time at the governmental level, and the government is in disarray. The Democratic Party, is in disarray. One of these crises is the debt ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things that surfaced in MMT a few years ago, like in 2010 to 11, there surfaced the idea that a platinum coin, with an arbitrary face value, that could be minted and deposited at the Federal Reserve, and eventually most of the money could wind up in the Treasury spending account. And since the face value of the coin was arbitrary,
mm-hmm.
it could be arbitrarily large, like $1 trillion coin,
mm-hmm.
$100 trillion coin. It turned out Congress passed a law in 1995. It was a currency law, and it allowed the minting of platinum coins, whose denominations could be set by the Secretary of the Treasury. The coins could then be minted by the mint and transported up to the New York Fed and deposited in the mint's account, at the New York Fed. There was another part of the law that gave the Treasury the power to sweep the profits that were in the mint's account. The profits are called the seigniorage from the coin. And the profits are the face value of the coin, and from that you subtract the cost of actually minting the coin, and getting it up to the New York Fed.
Mm-hmm.
So roughly the cost of getting it up to the New York Fed and minting it might be something like $3,500.
Mm.
And theoretically, you could have a coin that was $100 trillion. Okay, this would be just a 1-ounce platinum coin.
Right.
Okay. And so that value of $100 trillion could be swept out of the Mint's account into the Treasury spending account. The Treasury would have $100 trillion. Now, it couldn't spend the $100 trillion.
Right, because the coin is still there.
No, that's not the reason why it couldn't be spent. Actually,
Mhm.
the coin would actually remain in the vault at the Fed,
Mm.
as an asset of the Fed. But what was going to go into the Mint's account then was actually reserves created by the Fed of equal value to the coin.
Is that something more to do with the fact to have go back to like somewhat of like a gold standard almost?
No,
Okay.
it
Because
doesn't.
I'm trying to
Coin. Okay, this coin is actually fiat money.
I'm trying to understand what would be the reasoning behind doing that, to creating a kind of ceiling, so to speak. Why would we need to do that?
Are you talking about the debt ceiling now?
Right, because I'm trying to link the debt ceiling to the minting of the coin. Like, why would that make sense?
Okay. The debt ceiling was a law that was created by the progressives when we went into to World War I in 1917.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why it was because prior to that time, when the federal government wanted to print any more money, it had to get the consent of the Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And it was felt that during the wartime, this was a very unwieldy procedure,
Mm-hmm.
and that what should be done instead is giving the power to the executive branch to sell bonds, but to impose a limit of the debt, that it was able to incur. So in 1917, this was actually a liberalization of things.
Mm-hmm.
Over the years, the debt ceiling for the Treasury Department was always raised. It was a routine thing to raise it, but neither of the political parties wanted to get rid of the debt limit altogether, because they didn't want to be blamed by the other party for being fiscally irresponsible and getting rid of the debt limit. So the years passed, and it was always routine. Then suddenly in 1980 or so, the Republicans decided to make an issue out of it. And actually, the government of the United States went into default for a few days at that time, because people balked at raising the debt ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was another incident, I guess, during the early Gingrich years, where they tried to pull something like that also. But these kinds of things where they were blocking raising the debt ceiling was really very infrequent.
Mm-hmm.
Until Obama became the president and Mitch McConnell became the leader in the Senate of the Republicans. And also Paul Ryan became really influential in the House.
Mm-hmm.
Then it became actually more of a routine thing that the Republicans would always threaten not to raise the debt ceiling to get austerity concessions out of the Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
And they did this in 2011. They did this in 2012 to 2013. They got to something called the fiscal cliff, at that time, which was a settlement of the crisis in 2012 to 13. Then they threatened it a lot through 2014, 2015, but I don't think they had a debt ceiling crisis then. But then again, when Trump came in, there was another debt ceiling crisis for some reason, and the government was shut down. When these debt ceiling crises tend to occur, there are partial shutdowns, okay, of the government until the Congress actually settles it. Okay, so it's been completely irrational to have a debt limit. Certainly by the year 2000, it made no sense, okay, at all.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question too. Like, I don't see the point of having, I don't see the point of, I get the point of a debt ceiling. I just don't believe that a debt ceiling ever really existed because the government just spends money when it wants to, just from my, based on my understanding. Like, I just never seen like there was an issue where, oh my God, where are we going to get this money for this war? You know what I mean? Like, it just happens.
Well, remember, the federal government was on the gold standard.
No, I know.
And it was on the gold standard until 1971.
Right.
Okay, so it couldn't print as much money, okay, as it wanted then.
No, I know that.
Be in line with the gold supplies until that time. But since that time, it hasn't made any sense to have a debt limit.
Right.
Okay. So when the Republicans started using it really strategically to extract the concessions out of the Democrats, that should have been the signal, actually, for the Democrats to try to get rid of the debt limit. In fact, in 2010, when they had big majorities in both the House and Senate, the first thing they should have done would have been simply to have, gotten rid of the debt limit.
Right.
But they didn't. Okay, they failed. Oh. And so the Republicans have been able to use that to extract concessions from them for the last decade or so.
Yeah, I was going to ask about how does the reason I was saying is that based on your understanding about MMT, how would a debt limit even work? Like, why would that be? Okay,
here's how the debt limit works. Okay,
right.
The debt limit is a particular amount of money at this point.
Right.
The Treasury Department had gotten certain appropriations from the Congress, which are mandates from the Congress to spend money. So the Treasury Department very dutifully spent money on those things. And as it was spending more and more and more money, of course, it was engaged in deficit spending because of what I earlier mentioned, the leakages from the economy, okay, and so on. And so the Treasury balance was getting lower and lower as time went on. In June, by July, of this year, actually the debt limit had been on suspension for a long time due to a previous compromise, that was made. But then a few months back, the suspension of the debt limit, was lifted. In other words, it expired.
Right.
Okay, and so there was the debt limit again, and the Treasury was beginning to run out of money. In other words, in its actual spending account. So then it became necessary to do some bond issues.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but the debt limit was in place, and the actual level of debt was close to the debt limit. It was close to the debt ceiling. And so the Treasury did not have the authority to issue the securities that it would have needed to gotten into a safe balance again. So it's been using, since July 30th, it's been using extraordinary measures to actually pay the bills for spending that Congress had already appropriated.
Right.
So it's been basically slowing down spending of bills, waiting for tax revenues to be settled by the Federal Reserve, so the Federal Reserve could put some more new money into the Treasury spending account. So it was basically doing all these, and has been doing all these kinds of extraordinary things. Now, it's expected that the Treasury Department is going to run out of extraordinary things to do by October 15th. which is why the threat of a government shutdown is here. Now, what does all this have to do with the platinum coin? What does all this have to do with the platinum coin? Well, if the president gave an order to the Treasury Secretary to have the Mint create a platinum coin with $100 trillion in it and deposit this up at the Federal Reserve in New York, then the Treasury Department wouldn't have to issue any more bonds.
Right.
It could use part of the $100 trillion to spend the rest of the appropriations of Congress and to repay the previous debt that was falling due. And
wouldn't that give the Treasury Department more money? Wouldn't that give the Treasury Department more power, though?
No, I don't think it would give the Treasury Department any more power than it normally has.
Okay.
The Treasury Department spends money based on the appropriations of the Congress. All this $100 trillion could not be spent, as I was about to tell you earlier. The reason why it can't be spent is because the Treasury Department only has authority to spend what Congress appropriates, and it has authority to spend on repayment of debt, that was previously issued. So the debts of the United States, the public debt of the United States that has yet to be redeemed is roughly $28 trillion right now.
I just can't imagine being
so if the $100 trillion coin, was minted, Congress would be able to spend over a period of time to repay the $28 trillion. It would also be able to spend the appropriations that have already been passed by Congress. So say those appropriations are another $1 trillion for the rest of the fiscal year. So that's the extent of what it would be able to spend. The rest, the other 70 trillion, it wouldn't be able to touch until Congress actually appropriated more spending.
What if Congress? I was going to say, what if Congress says our national debt is gone? It's over. That's it. We don't have any more debt. We're white clean, new slate. Could it do that?
Okay. If Congress said it was going to wipe the debt clean, just like that.
Just like that.
That would represent a default on the debt, and a default on the debts of this country is prohibited by the 14th Amendment, Section 4 of the Constitution. It's illegal for this country to default. In fact, what the Congress is doing now, basically threatening default, is probably a violation of the oaths of office they have taken. Mm-hmm. Because they have an obligation to uphold the 14th Amendment, Section 4. Also, the President has an oath of office. Secretary of Treasury has an oath of office. The Director of the Mint has an oath of office. And all these oaths of offices obligate them to adhere to the prohibition in Section 4 of the 14th Amendment. Mm-hmm. So therefore, the president should be doing everything that he could do to try to avoid a default. And one of the things that he can do is to mint this platinum coin in order to prevent a default.
I was going to ask, the reason why I asked that question is because let's say Congress did do that, right? Let's say there was like really ballsy, said federal debt gone. Do you think the American people would care enough to make a noise about it?
Yeah, because there are lots and lots of rich people and large corporations and banks that are holding treasury debt. And there are lots of foreign nations that are holding treasury securities, because treasury securities are investment vehicles.
Right.
In other words, there's more money.
But wouldn't that benefit?
Pay interest.
But wouldn't that benefit, let's say, corporations? Well, I'm assuming, and you can probably know better than I would, I'm assuming that a lot of this debt that the United States has is due to these tech companies, these large major corporations. I'm assuming that they also are part of that. So wouldn't that also erase some of their debt, some of their financial issues?
No, I don't think. Okay, it would, because if they're holding the treasury debt,
Mm-hmm.
those are but basically tax credits that they have.
Okay.
Eventually, they will become tax credits. Those are assets, okay, of the large companies. Okay, so when you say that you just want to buy fiat, completely erase the federal debt,
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying is you want to destroy the assets of the other nations and the corporations, okay, and the rich people that own the treasury securities.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, they would be very, very upset about that. And in fact, they'd probably even be upset by the issuance of the platinum coin and the failure of the treasury to issue any more debt.
Mm-hmm.
Because from their point of view, the debt is a safe investment.
Mm-hmm.
They can buy the debt. Well, it's not simply a safe investment. They can borrow against the collateral of the debt they own.
Right.
And they can
Mm-hmm.
leverage it. Actually, they can leverage it up to 3 times.
Right. I want to
securities.
I would love to come back on your show and talk about how cryptocurrency and like maybe cryptocurrency and MMT kind of may work well, not kind of work together, but if they do work together, I would like to talk to a crypto and what would an MMT person feel about cryptocurrency. I would love to come on your show because that's a whole topic in itself. We're not going to have time to talk about that, but
yeah, we won't have time to talk about that. We have to get to the discussion already. But just to say one thing about that,
right.
Okay? Cryptocurrency
Mm-hmm.
is currency that is mined.
Right.
So the supply of that currency is limited.
Right.
In the same way as gold was limited.
Exactly.
So if we made cryptocurrency the official currency of the United States, in effect, we'd be going back on a gold standard.
But also, too, there are cryptocurrency that's proof of work. So there's some other cryptos out there. There's some altcoins out there. We can talk about that too, but we'll get into that. But that's a whole topic on itself. It's a lot. It's a lot to talk about.
It's a whole topic on itself, but
yeah. But you are right though. We are going back to a system where there is like this isn't a finite coin. You know, it's not infinite.
Right.
So, right.
So when we last had a system like that,
right,
there were depressions and recessions roughly every 7 years.
Right.
So do we really want to have an economy like that?
Well,
so I think the system is actually better.
If you ask the American people, we continuously have that. I mean, we've had like a recession every 7 years. We were thinking about the COVID. Before COVID, we had the financial collapse of 2008. Then we had the Y2K in 2000.
There was a small recession from 2000 to 2002.
Right. So we've had that. We've had that, even regardless, even of not having off the gold standard. Like,
but when we were on the gold standard,
it was worse.
We had depressions that would curl your hair.
I believe you.
73, 93.
But isn't that more to do with capitalism than actually do with the gold standard?
It actually had to do with both.
Okay, because I would assume we had a more functioning system, right? Because capitalism is not a functioning system. I feel that that wouldn't have been a problem.
There is no danger.
Mm-hmm.
Inherent danger, okay, in relying on fiat currency.
Mm-hmm.
It gives the government more flexibility,
sure, yeah.
To adjust to economic changes, okay, and crises. But what we have to do with the fiat currency is we have to make sure it's used for the public purpose. In other words, our problem is not the fiat currency. Our problem is the effects of neoliberalism, over a long period of time, and the fact that it's created, okay, an oligarchy in this country. So it's not fiat currency we have to get rid of. It's
No,
the
not at all.
oligarchy that we got to get rid of.
Not at all. I'm not one of these people that feels like fiat is evil. I just feel the system how we handle fiat is evil.
I agree with that.
So I don't see a problem with fiat. Yeah, I just feel like the government again, they print money. You can just help working class folks, and they do not. So here we are. The other question I wanted to ask you too. This might seem off topic, but it isn't. But job guarantee, and also with relationship.
No, that's not off topic. The job guarantee is very central to MMT.
And the reason why I wanted to bring it up because people don't ask that kind of question of like, let's say for example, we have for lack of better words, like the Social Security office, that's a federal job. No one asks about how these workers are getting paid. No one says no one has an issue with that, where this money is coming from in that regard, and making sure that we have a federal jobs guarantee. A lot of people are for that. But when it comes to healthcare, again, always going back to the healthcare argument, why is that a problem? I don't understand how the federal jobs guarantee and the Medicare for all movement, why is there like a separation when it comes to that kind of conversation? Because again, I speak to people who bring up the idea of they rather a jobs guarantee versus a UBI, right? Even though we're not having a discussion over what is better, but no one's making the argument or making the case that that's out of reach versus, again, federal spending for a Medicare for all system. Is it because a job guarantee brings income? Like, is it what do you think that why someone is making that argument? What is that? Why is that a problem?
Right. Okay. Let me start by saying, first of all, the whole idea that we would spend more if we had a Medicare for all system, okay, that the government would spend more is false.
Of course.
It is foolish. By the experiences of all the other countries that have something like a Medicare for all system, okay, of a universal healthcare system, by their experience, we would spend less. Not only less. What the federal government is now spending on healthcare to subsidize all the private healthcare we have, okay, and some of the public healthcare, okay, we have. That's been costed out at roughly 2.5 to 2.6 trillion each year. That's enough by itself to support the Medicare for all system. It's certainly enough. It might even be possible that the Medicare for all system would be able to reduce total health spending even to 2 trillion a year, whereas now total health spending in the United States is approaching 4 trillion a year.
Right.
So we're spending far more than we have to spend. The federal government is spending probably more than it will have to spend at the 2.5 to 2.6 to 2.7 trillion that it's now spending. It would probably spend less than that. So the argument that we can't afford it, that we're going to spend more for it,
doesn't exist.
That's a lot of bunk. That's a lot of bunk.
Absolutely. No, I agree.
Okay. With respect to the job guarantee, what the job guarantee is for, in my terms, from my standpoint, and I think this is a general view with respect to MMT people as well. And by the way, all the job guarantee proposals you hear, they're not all the MMT job guarantee proposal.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it.
The MMT job guarantee proposal is something very specific, and it's got a lot of nice things, okay, that are attached to it. Okay, but the basic point here is that there's an idea, okay, of freedom to work at a living wage with good fringe benefits. And the question is, do we want to supply that freedom to the American people? Is it a human right for the American people to have that kind of freedom. I think that is a human right.
That's weird to me.
Part of the Economic Bill of Rights.
That's weird to me. That's a conversation. That's weird to me. That's a whole conversation. That's very odd.
That's another whole conversation. If you want to come on once a week and have these whole different conversations with me, I'm all for it. That would be great.
I would do it. I know Laura would love that. She'll, oh my God, Shareef and Joe Firestone on a podcast again. She'll start tweeting it out. She'll love it.
Oh, that would be funny.
Oh, I would totally do it actually. Oh man, but I'm serious. It's crazy to me how like the idea of like we have to make the case for the right to work.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? People are ready and willing and want to work. All they want is a fair wage and fringe benefits that are basically human rights, and we can't get that.
Right. So what are some examples that for the MMT community, how they view a job guarantee? What is something they think about in that regard?
Okay. Okay, I'm going to go through a few slides here.
Okay.
The job guarantee in outline is a proposal for providing federally financed but locally administered jobs in local communities around the country at a true living wage with good fringe benefits, including medical benefits and paid vacation, family leave, sick leave to anyone who wants a job, actually providing true full employment. Why do I say true full employment?
I like it already.
Simply because anyone who wants a job will find one in the job guarantee program.
Right.
Also, permanently in any kind of economy, whether the economy is up or whether the economy is down, these jobs would be available. And after an initial positive shock to the economy, the job guarantee would actually provide a break on inflation. Okay.
Let me ask you a question in regard too. Based on what you're saying, will that end world homelessness?
Theoretically, it would end homelessness in the countries, that would adopt it and that was serious about the conditions. But the reason why is that since the job guarantee, would pay a living wage, well, that has to be a wage that's going to pay for homes for people, right?
Right.
Doesn't pay for homes for people, then it wouldn't be a living wage.
Right.
Okay, so that's basically covered by that. Okay,
Right.
there are more benefits. Okay, now the details differ among economists, and policy analysts. MMT economists tend to favor a larger living wage, than others. They're less fearful of a possible inflationary impact of the program. Instead, MMT economists, like me, view a job guarantee as an automatic stabilizer that after the initial shock of its introduction will maintain full employment and have a deflationary impact when it comes to wages. Now, why after the initial introduction? Okay. Of course, the initial introduction, since it's going to be at a living wage, it's going to force the whole private sector to lift its wages up.
Right.
Okay, that's going to be the initial shock, and there's going to have to be an adjustment to that. But if people in the private sector want to get people to work for them, they're going to have to pay a higher wage than the job guarantee is offering.
Right, of course.
And they're going to have to offer better fringe benefits. Okay.
I have to ask a question. I have to ask a question from the naysayers or people like someone like my aunt. So what you're saying is you want somebody, you want a person who works in a grocery store to be able to afford his own house.
Uh, don't know whether that's included in a living wage, okay, or not. Okay. It seems to me what would be included, okay, is a home with fairly decent standards. You
Yeah,
know,
I'm asking it too. I'm asking that because I actually agree with that. Because I have discussions not only with my members of my family and some people in my community. Because I asked them, I always told myself, I don't see the problem. We're saying this job, right, that serves the community is something that's important to the community, right? Because I'm a community focused kind of person.
it's
So,
important to the community,
so
right?
if it's important to the community says this is a job, this is a function that we need, and this person is saying, "Hey, pick me. I'll do this particular job. I'll pick this function." All I'm asking is, can I have enough money to live in this community? And us as a society, we say no. Too bad. Just take what we give you. I just think that's unfair.
And so do I.
Right. So for me, a job guarantee, I agree with that job guarantee in a sense that I don't care what job it is. I don't care if you're mopping the floor, you're a taxi driver, you're a delivery person, or you're working at a grocery store, you're flipping burgers, whatever it is. If the
Right.
community says
You're still entitled to a living wage.
exactly 100%, 100%. There. Now I'm okay with jobs closing down. I mean, if a job or function in society doesn't work or in a community and it has to close up, well, the community just said that job or that function or that entity wasn't useful, and that's fine, and that happens, and that needs to, and I don't see why that's a problem.
I don't see why that's a problem either.
Yeah,
In other words, it seems to me that if there are some businesses that are performing a useful social function, okay,
right,
and can't afford to pay the living wage,
right,
then those businesses could be subsidized by the government.
right.
But there should never be a business that is not going to pay a living wage.
That's the problem. That's the biggest problem. Like I have a job now. The job I work for is a multi-billion-dollar company, and they won't refuse to pay people even $15 an hour. They just won't do it.
Yeah, that's the problem. And
They won't do it.
$15 an hour is not a living wage,
Not at all.
especially not a living wage in New York City.
Not at all. Yeah, not at all.
Especially not a living wage. In fact,
right.
the version of the job guarantee that I favor says that you take the lowest cost of living area in the country.
Mm-hmm.
You define what a living wage would be for that particular area. Then you look at the CPI in all the other areas of the United States.
You know what's so funny?
You adjust that wage upward. You adjust upward.
I literally had a discussion with a friend of mine about that too. I shit you not. I was telling him that I personally feel that we should find out how much it costs to live in a community, right? What's the cost of living in this community, and then pay them based off that. So, in other words, so let's say it costs. I think someone did a report. I think you feasibly you need about $30 an hour to feasibly live in New York per person. And then I was saying that take that same model of whoever that economist who did the study, you need about $30 an hour to live in New York. How much it would be to live in, say, Kentucky, or how much it would say to live in California or wherever else, and then pay that people based on that, I guess, the GDP of the state or whatever. I was literally saying that. I was like, that just makes sense. Instead of like having a national standard system, let's pay people based on, I guess, the area they're living in. If it costs 15, let's say, in some small town, sure, pay, because that works for that small town. But if it doesn't work for that small town, pay them more. So I don't see the issue with that.
Right, and I don't see the issue with that either. I think that's the way the JG wages should be calculated.
Right.
It should be different, but for each of the regions, and I mean also pretty small regions.
Right. I agree with that too.
Also, very different cost of living if one is living, in the center of New York City, as opposed to someone who's living 100 miles away in New York State, something like that. The cost of living is really very, very different.
Right.
And the wages should be adjustable on that basis. Okay, it seems to me.
Right.
Okay, so the reason why the MMTers see this as an automatic stabilizer, okay, and also a hedge against inflation, is once the minimum wages are established, okay, in that area, then the private sector businesses are going to have to pay more.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then when people decide that they want, okay, a higher wage, which they are going to decide because people always want to have more money.
Right, of course.
Then businesses are going to evaluate things by saying, well, do I really have to pay this person, okay, a higher wage? Okay, if the value that this person has to the business, okay, is great, then the higher wage, okay, is going to be paid. Okay, but if the person is doing a function which can easily be replaced but by other people who are coming out of the job guarantee program,
right.
So then that will create a bit of wage stabilization instead of contributing to an upward spiral, okay, of wages. On the other hand, would also not, okay, in any sense, actually create a depression because the wage always has to be a living wage,
right,
okay, for each area. As long as we're careful about that and there's really tough administration about that, then it should have a very good effect on the community as a whole.
I have a weird question to ask in regards to this too. So a lot of people in the MMT community, for lack of a better word, they're financial people. They know money. Am I correct?
Yes, there are a lot of people in the MMT community who know money. For example, one of the MMT developers, okay, is a hedge funder, okay, by the name of, Warren Multiplier, who made a considerable amount of money, okay, in the hedge funds area. And he was the first person to write something that was recognizable as an MMT synthesis.
Mm-hmm. No, and the reason why I'm asking this is because if the MMT community, they're financial experts or they know about finance, is it hard for them to say, and this is like sounding really ignorant in this regard, can they just go to the Congress, go to the Treasury Department and say, look, we solved the problem. Here you go. Here's some information we can give you. We're experts. Take our word for it. We're telling you this is going to save money. It's going to help everybody. Come on, I'm helping you guys. How difficult is for them to do that?
How difficult is it for them to do that?
Right.
In terms of the job guarantee program?
Right, or just pitching an idea to Congress or the government. Like, for example, like if an economist wants to just say, hey, I have an idea that's going to actually benefit the government. Let me have a meeting. Let me take a meeting and let me tell you this is the best system to go about helping jobs guarantee, or even like anything, Medicare for all, whatever it is. I mean, we already know that Medicare for all.
Yeah, it seems to me it's very hard to pitch them.
Right. So
the reason why it's very hard to pitch them is that they're so bought by the donors.
Right.
They only have time for the donors, okay, in the lobby groups.
Right.
They don't have time for people, who are coming in off the street, basically, to give them a presentation on something.
Do you believe in evil? Because this
Sure.
donor class is purely evil. I just can't imagine that you're making money off the suffering of others. Like, there's no other way. And they have to know that. They have to know that they're doing that.
I certainly do believe, okay, in evil. I believe there are a lot of evil people, who are running around.
Right. Not to change the subject off MMT, but I was like, because from the beginning of the conversation of just talking about the whole spectrum of MMT, talking about the gold standard, what we used to do, federal spending, job guarantee, the Treasury Department. I was like, man, like, why isn't like someone in the room was like, you know what? Maybe we should help some people. Yeah, it just blows my mind. It blows my mind.
Yes, I know. And, it blows my mind too, because
I couldn't have a job there. I would be fired the first day.
during the 1960s, okay, and during the 1970s, it was not so hard to get a meeting with your congressman, okay, and to pitch an idea and to have them listen.
Right.
Not so hard, okay, as it is now.
I can imagine.
Much, much harder.
Right, I can imagine.
But things have changed.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was gonna ask you also to the net financial assets. How is that gonna be? How will that drain out the economy? Because we talked about that too in regards to the whole the ceiling, the kind of like we was discussing that. Like, why would that be? We already talked about like that wouldn't be an issue. Republicans and Democrats was going back and forth about this whole ceiling. We've really discussed about that's a point. That's not a point. But in regards to, I guess, draining out the economy, why would that be a problem?
Okay, let me show you something here. Okay, so here's a chart on how Treasury spending happens.
Okay.
It creates net the financial assets. Congress appropriates spending.
Mm.
The Federal Reserve creates the high-powered reserves. What are high-powered reserves? They're just additions to this Treasury spending account, which the Federal Reserve creates. And the reason why we say that's high-powered, okay, is because that's the most acceptable form of addition in terms of our society. In other words, if the Federal Reserve actually creates the money, then that's the most acceptable money. It's more acceptable even than a regular bank's money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Treasury spends the reserves into the private sector. That creates financial assets. In other words, the Treasury is sending money to people. So it's giving them financial assets. But on the other hand, it's also taxing away financial assets.
Mm-hmm.
And when it taxes away the financial assets, as we said, in the process of settlement, those financial assets are destroyed. So what is the outcome of this process? It's net financial assets. When do we get net financial assets? How do we get net financial assets?
Mm.
We get it through deficit spending by the federal government.
Mm.
Okay, now when I say we, I'm not talking of any individual, okay, or any particular company. Okay,
Right.
what I'm talking about is the non-government sector. The way the non-government sector gets net financial assets is when the federal government is actually deficit spending.
Mm.
If it has a surplus, it's drawing money out of the non-government sector. So, from the standpoint of the non-government sector, deficit spending is a good thing. Right. Because it's the surplus of the non-government sector. Mm-hmm. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. But you mentioned something about draining net financial assets out of the company, out of
the country.
Right. And I do have a chart on that as well. But this chart actually relates to what the Federal Reserve does. Mm-hmm. It points out Congress appropriates taxes and delegates that to the Treasury Authority to create and sell debt instruments. Mm. The Treasury collects tax revenues and sells debt instruments. Mm. And then the central point, during the settlement, the bank settlement, the Federal Reserve marks down private sector accounts, draining reserves from the private sector. Basically destroying the reserves in the private sector. Mm-hmm. As it marks up the Treasury spending account, with new reserves, okay, in equal amounts. Okay, so that's how money is drained out of the non-government.
Mhm.
Okay, now previously I was talking about how net financial assets are drained out of the economy through foreign trade.
Right. Yeah, because I was asking that too because I wanted to know like about the draining out of the economy because I wanted to know like what would be the reason to even put a cap, how about the ceiling, so to speak, if again going back to the whole point of like the government just prints when it needs to, I guess. Like why would we why what and you to further your point, you was even saying that having the ceiling doesn't even necessary. So I wanted to know like what would be the thought process to even consider even having that a point of argument.
Right. You might want to drain money out of the economy or net the financial assets out of the economy because this is one of the primary ways of controlling inflation.
Mm.
In other words, when there's too much spending power inside of the economy, that is one of the causes, okay, of an inflationary episode.
Okay.
Okay, so if government deficit spending gets too high, then but there might be a need to pull money out of the economy easily, and so the federal government can do that with new taxes. On the other hand, it's difficult to get the Congress to approve any new taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's best to try to set this up in such a way that the taxes kick in, okay, on an automatic basis. In other words, they become an automatic stabilizer. That when net financial assets happen to reach a particular point, and we judge this, okay, by whether we're getting, okay, inflationary episodes out of the economy, that automatically drives up certain taxes, okay, in order to take some of the consumption power out of the economy. Okay, but you're also specifically asking about foreign trade and also savings. Those are not actually drains out of the net but financial assets of the non-government sector. In other words, those are still in the non-government sector, but when they're placed in savings accounts, okay, or where when that's in treasury bonds, then it's not as liquid for spending, okay, in the everyday economy, and so that could cause a slowdown in consumption, a slowdown in sales. Could cause people to be fired, and so that creates a deflationary episode in the economy when we might not want one.
Right.
So it's important to put in stabilizers in order to cushion against the deflationary episodes. And one of the major stabilizers that's favored, by MMT is the job guarantee program. Because what's going to happen, in the job guarantee program is that when the private sector goes downhill for some reason, perhaps because of temporary leakages of financial assets to foreign nations, or to savings accounts, or things like that, and the private sector starts to lay off people, well, people can still work at a living wage in the job guarantee program. So the job guarantee program sets a floor on how the economy can fall, how far it can fall. And that's why the job guarantee is so important. Okay, at once it can have a deflationary effect when things are going too fast, but it can also have a stabilization effect when things in the private sector have completely slowed down.
How does MMT factor in with the private sector? I hear a lot of MMT. I hear a lot of people talk about MMT as usually talk about federal spending, but how can MMT work with in the private sector? And there's a reason why I'm asking this, because I really feel that one of the things that I want to get into is more mutual aid and community focus on doing it ourselves. Because I'm really at a point where, even though I am going to always push the government to do better, but I'm at a point where I feel that we as our community needs to start doing some of our own funding, our own programs that we need to do for ourselves and make our own communities better. In that regards, healthcare too. So, how do you think MMT kind of falters in that? Because I really feel that that should be the next frontier in our healthcare fight.
All right. Okay. So the way MMT, would look at that is that uh, if no federal funds, are involved in that, but
Mhm.
just people giving money to
Mhm.
each other,
Right.
that represents a redistribution of net financial assets uh,
Mhm.
inside of the private sector. Now
Mhm.
that's fine. There's
Right.
nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Insofar as that creates an equalization in the economy, then it's much
Mhm.
better for us as a society. Uh, Also, the functions, of having mutual aid, in this way, of strengthening people when they want to strike,
Right.
that can have a very salutary effect, because if they strike successfully for higher wages, or better fringe benefits, it weakens the oligarchy, the
Mhm.
power, the oligarchy. And so not so much money is going to be extracted and pushed up to the top.
Right.
So that, is very important. But I think that's the way that MMT would see that. Now, if it were possible in politics to have the government actually helping people who were running mutual aid endeavors, if we get some of the money to flow that way,
Right.
that would be a very, very important change, a very important addition to the safety net,
Right.
I think.
Right. No, I agree. I don't think that will ever happen, but I definitely agree with that because I feel that I think the biggest uphill battle, and again, I'm segueing a little bit from our MT conversation. Our biggest uphill battle is getting Americans to feel that we can take ownership in our own community. We can do certain things, and we don't have to wait for our congressperson. We don't have to always wait to make change. And so I'm kind of focused on that aspect. I've been really thinking about that too. So I feel that a lot of the people that I talk to, it's more focused on, well, we need to pressure this person. We need to vote for this person in, and I'm leaning more towards community building because I really feel that we need faster results than waiting for someone to get elected. And it's again, not to take too much away from our conversation, but I'm tired of like looking at my members of my community suffer. It's really hard to do this job as an activist and organizer and see that people are like doing bad, and I don't have the money or means to help them, and also too that when I talk to people, this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about literally people like they need help yesterday, and like we don't have. I can't help them. The only thing I could do is like tweet at my politician and say I'm mad at the fact we don't have healthcare in this country. I'm just tired of looking at members of my community and like not being able to provide help for them. And like I could tell them like, yeah, sure, this is a community center over here or there's a mutual aid over here, and but generally speaking, that's not going to do that much for that person.
Yes,
And so it's like I just don't. I'm trying to find other ways, faster ways rather, because it's just not. It's just I'm just kind of looking at it. It really bothers me a lot.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah,
work you're doing every day,
yeah,
to see that, going on, and you're up close and personal all the time. You know these people, you like these people,
mm,
you love these people in
mm,
certain cases, and you can't do
yeah,
anything to help them. It's
right,
it's got to just eat you from the inside out.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So I mean, that's why
It's really
I'm,
tough work.
it is, and that's why I'm curious about the MMT and the financial system, because maybe there's a way, again, that we can focus on, like, look, instead of looking outwardly, looking inwardly. Maybe the community can start investing in ourselves, and we can start thinking about ways that we can actually do certain things to build the community, and then maybe we can go to the government and say, "Hey, look what we've done. Do you want to help? Do you want to build in? Do you want to funnel some of this in here?" Right. So thinking of other strategies, we're getting there.
Right. Okay. So let's, until next time,
Yeah.
postpone this. Okay. And if you want
Sure.
to schedule, okay, an extra session with me,
Oh, yeah, sure.
I'll be happy to do, okay, an extra session on this. But there are some things we haven't covered tonight, which I think are important. First,
Okay.
the idea of the public purpose, because
Mhm.
that gets into the MMT literature a lot, and I
Okay.
think you'd be interested in hearing about what kinds of things the MMTers talk about, okay, as the public purpose.
I would love that.
Okay, that I think should be very interesting to you, because really a lot of them are very normative about it.
Mhm.
Really are. Okay. There are a lot of them, okay, who really care. But then also, secondly, the federal job guarantee has a dimension in it that we really haven't talked about, and that's the participatory dimension in the program, so that people who go into the program can actually propose social ventures in their communities to better things, okay, in their communities. In other words, part of the MMT job guarantee is, well, you go to a job guarantee center, a job center, as opposed to the kinds of centers we have now, okay, which are the
Right.
unemployment centers. Okay, you go to a job center, and there are going to be jobs posted, and there are going to be some organizations who are looking for people from the job guarantee program. There will be projects that have already started, but say that you don't see one that
Right.
fits the local need that you want to say, that in the MMT job guarantee program, there will be a provision to organize new ventures, social enterprise ventures, uh, where you and other people who want to fill the same need can combine and have your wages covered by the federal government to start up this new venture, and
Right.
have also expenses covered by the federal government too. Now, some of this aid, like for the expenses, would be funneled through local stakeholders, but the wages would not be funneled through the local stakeholders. They would be coming from the federal government to you directly.
Mm.
So there are no middle persons in between you and the federal government, because the MMT people, okay, were very aware that in that situation there can be rake-offs,
Right.
and they didn't want to see any rake-offs in
Right.
terms of the wages, the basic wages. So that's a very important aspect of the program, and we can discuss the kinds of social ventures that might be needed in your community, okay, at some length. And it's really a way to empower people in local communities to think of doing new things that the local communities really need. And it can be a way, by the way, of actually funding some of the mutual aid activities, okay, that you're thinking about. Okay, because of course some part, okay, of that sort of thing is about raising money from the local community to support it.
Right.
How are the people who are doing the raising from the local community and organizing these ventures, how are they going to live in the meantime?
Right.
They're going to live through the job guarantee program, which from day one, from the time they walk in and look to formulate a new venture, they will be getting paid by the hour
Right.
in order to do that. And that's a very, very important thing, I think.
No, I agree. I love that. Yeah.
to do. Okay, so let's but now go to some of the comments.
Oh, nice.
Okay, I'm not going to go through all the comments because we are now beginning to be short of time, but I noticed that there were some that were pretty good. Jeff Denton said, weird, it seems like a very well coordinated joint effort, much like the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotics, making the harmless hemp plant a Schedule 1 narcotic in every major country, which was just reversed less than a year ago. That, of course, nobody knows about as well. Yes, it's amazing what but the mutual globalists that control most of the world's governments and donate very generously and philanthropically to whatever media, higher institutes of learning they don't already own, accomplish. I think he was trying to say there, but then he ran out of space. I think there's a limit on the size of comments that you can do in this interface. So he's kind of stopped from completing that comment. So he later says, Japan has had the universal health care since 1938, and people there live 5 years longer than we do here. Yes, Jeffrey, that is absolutely correct.
I do.
Yeah, I think they live until their life expectancy is until 1983, until 83 years of age or 84 years of age or something like that. In fact, even in Canada, people are living 3 years longer there than they are here in the United States.
That's why? Because they have a national healthcare system.
Yes, because they have a Medicare for all system.
Yes.
And it started out, of course, as you know, province-based.
Right.
And it's still province-based in terms of the administration of it.
Right.
Still is province-based. The funding is now federal, of course, where they need to have the federal funding.
Right.
Okay, so Lisa says to Lana, yes, Lana, they do. I think this very topic is a control tactic. I call it the big ruse. I'm not sure what Lisa was referring to there. It was I think that she's probably referring to Lana's comment that our college textbooks are still teaching old gold standard logic. Okay, and Lisa was commenting on that. Yes, that is the big ruse. They are not teaching the economists who go through school about the real world and how the real world works. They're teaching them about some fable that comes out of textbooks. For example,
that's a fact. I agree with that because I've never heard, when I was in high school or even in college, I never heard of this before, ever. I knew that we would have the gold standard, but as far as I knew after that, that's it. That's all I knew.
Me too.
They don't go anything else. That's it.
Yeah, that was really something. There's one thing that's there's a real fairy tale, okay, in classical economics. The fairy tale is known, okay, as the expression is, okay, that there is a money multiplier, okay, that basically banks use, that there's a multiplier of 10 to 1 on reserves they hold in terms of what they're actually allowed to lend out. That is a pure fiction.
Wow. Right.
Based on the idea that there is a loanable funds market and a limited amount of money which is available in the loanable funds market, and that banks actually go into the loanable funds market and get the funds they turn around, okay, to lend to you. That is not true.
Right.
When banks make a loan to you, they create the money out of thin air. They add to what's in your account at the bank by using the computer to mark up the account. That serves as money, okay, in our system. And what do they get in return? They get your note. The note, okay, is the asset. They never lend out any of their reserves. they don't lend out any reserves at all. They
Mm.
create the money. So there's no 10-to-1 multiplier. It's a fable that is observed only after the fact. In other words, once they make a loan, then, maybe every night, okay, or at the end of every week, they check the ratio, okay, of their reserves to what they lent out. And they have a ratio of some sort that they're supposed to observe. But if they don't actually make that ratio, there's really no penalty because they go into the overnight market, okay, and they borrow funds, okay, at the overnight rate, which is extremely low to make their requirement. But the basic point is there is no control on what they lend out on a day-to-day basis. They make the loans first, then they worry about whether they fulfill the requirement. And if they haven't fulfilled the requirement, they go into the overnight market. If the overnight market is frozen, they go to the discount window at the Federal Reserve. They get the funds from the Federal Reserve. So there's never any failure to meet the particular requirement, okay, they have to meet. There's no constraint on how much money they loan out day by day. If they think they have a credit-worthy customer, but they don't check to see how much they've loaned out on that day, they make the loan.
Right.
Okay, so the money multiplier, which is in all the textbooks still, is just a fiction.
Right.
Evelina says she thinks it's great that you're asking questions about MMT. Well, it's certainly fun for me.
Yeah. I like her.
Yeah, so do I. Unfortunately, I think she's down, okay, in Argentina now. She's been there for some time. I think we'd like to get her back to the United States if we possibly could. Anyway, Lana says, okay, Medicare for all is a public purpose. She's dead right about that.
Yep, she's right.
And Lisa says, they're so scared they choose to starve people rather than try to understand there's another way to do the economics of funding and valuing deficits.
Is that my Lisa? Is that Lisa Theobald?
That is Lisa Girl. Yes, that is Lisa Theobald. Yes. Indeed, that is Lisa Theobald.
It's my girl.
And Lana says, but Pelosi belongs to the Peterson Group. I'm not sure what you mean by belongs to the Peterson Group, but she does go to the Peterson Foundation meetings, and she gives speeches there, and there's rarely an ounce of difference from the kinds of speeches she gives there that Kevin McCarthy gives there. They both go there, and they give speeches, and they sound like they're basically echoing each other. And they talk about austerity. And Lisa says, no joke, not Joe. No joke, not Joe.
I love that.
And Kate, she said they even did a spinal tap on her. Weird. And Amber says, because it's an observable truth. I'm not sure what was an observable truth. It might be a detail about the money. Yes, it is an observable truth. And Laura says, Joe, for the question section, what do you think is at the heart of people's misgivings about state efforts? Is it as simple as concerns about fiscal sustainability and states are currency users, not currency issuers, even though these concerns have been answered?
I don't think so. I think they use that talking point because they don't have anything else to say. Because like no one never asks, well, how does bridges get done? How does roads get repaired? How does lights in the streets get fixed? Like any other financial thing we spend, no one asks questions for it. Nobody. But people are always asking for healthcare because those are talking points they hear. Like it's never a problem of like money. Like road gets repaired in New York City all the time. No one says, well, how do we get the money for that? No one says that. Nobody.
But for me, I don't entirely agree with that. I think some of the people who've been hassling us actually think that the healthcare burden is too great a burden for their states to take on. What they're looking at is the current politics, okay, in their states, and they're thinking about the constraints, okay, of those particular kinds of politics, and they're observing in their states how this service is being cut, okay, and that service, okay, is being cut, and the state governments are always claiming the tax base is inadequate and there's poverty at the state level, okay, and stuff like that. And so they're looking at that, okay, as the status quo, and they're trying to imagine how their state could afford a healthcare program that at the state level would be expensive. I think, okay, what they're overlooking is first that the people of the state are spending more money than that anyway.
Right.
In the first place. Okay, like for example, okay, it was projected in Jerry Friedman's study that in one way or another, the people of Washington were going to spend $97 billion on healthcare in this year. $97 billion. It was also projected that if they had the single payer program there, they would only have spent $67 billion. Okay, so the fact is, they would have saved, if they had gotten whole Washington in for 2021,
right,
they would have saved $30 billion this year off what they spent anyway.
But here's my
spending the 97
billion. But here's my point. Let's say the argument is, let's say the state, let's say we know for a fact, right? Even though I don't agree, but let's say we know for a fact that a particular state can't afford a single payer system, right? Let's say that was a fact. What's the harm, or why would it be difficult to ask the government and say, hey, let's say all the members of that state says, hey, we want you to help fund our healthcare system. What's the problem with them doing that? Like, again, we fund Israel. Why can't we fund Washington or New York or California? Why can't you fund a particular state? Why is that a difficult conversation when we know that the government gives money to another country? Why can't you, the same energy you did there, why don't you provide that same energy with a particular state? I don't see why that would be a confusion if that was money was a concern.
Right. I think you're completely right about that. I don't see why it's a problem to have that conversation. Back in the 1960s and 1970s, there were organizations of states and cities in Washington, D.C. I'm sure those associations are still there. But right. During the 1960s and the 1970s, they were always asking the federal government for money. They were always asking for revenue sharing from the federal government. That was big business back then. They were getting the revenue sharing back then. As the years went by, there was less and less of the revenue sharing. Those programs fell into disuse. Why? Because of the victory of neoliberalism in the country, as an ideology. People stopped having those conversations. They somehow felt they didn't have the right to have those particular conversations. But to answer something about this, the MMT people who are coming at us and saying there are fiscal sustainability problems with the states, I think are coming from that particular point of view. They're not really thinking about pure fiscal sustainability problems the states have. What they're thinking of is political sustainability problems that are spilling over into the fiscal sustainability area. If by Jerry Friedman's evaluation of the Washington situation is correct, you can easily see that most of the states in the United States would be able to afford single-payer programs. But the reason why is because, take $100 billion as a round figure. That study shows 30 to 33%, is going to be saved by the single payer program. It also shows, okay, that another, let's say, $47 billion out of the $100 billion would actually, one way or another, be covered by the federal government. And it shows that the gap that the individual states would have to fill would only be 20% of the total amount one started with before one actually introduced the single payer program. If you look at $100 billion as the example, then the state would end up having to cover $20.5 billion. Furthermore, most of that actually more than the $20.5 billion would actually be covered by the employer payroll tax of 8.5% and the employee payroll tax, okay, of 2%. Those sources of revenue, without the other sources of revenue that are laid out, okay, in the Washington program, would be enough to cover that gap of $20.5 billion. Actually, more than enough. If I don't have the figures right in front of me right now, but if I'm correct, just those two sources of revenue would produce $28 billion. Right. Rather than the $20.5 billion, okay, that was actually needed. Now, every state has employer payroll.
Right.
They could be paying that employer payroll tax. And every state, of course, has employees that can be paying the 2% as well.
Right.
So every state can afford to fill that gap.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. So I think every state can afford single payer.
Let's address the elephant in the room. It has all to do about the fact that the insurance lobbyist don't want us to do it.
It's that, and it's also the years we spent actually listening to the neoliberals and internalizing the way they think about politics and internalizing their ideas of the nice things we cannot have.
Right.
In other words, there's this business, people just don't believe they can get nice things from the government.
Right.
They have very bad attitudes towards the government now. I can tell you, from being alive in the 1950s and 1960s, we had entirely different expectations of the federal government. Right. We had good expectations of the government. We thought we were entitled to nice things from the federal government. For example, we thought we were entitled to full employment. And whenever there wasn't full employment from the federal government, we got real angry in the 1960s and 1970s.
Right.
But then somehow by the 1980s, people just accepted that the unemployment was going to be 5%. It wasn't only the economists who talked about a natural rate of, let's say, 5% to 5.5%. The people themselves grew to believe that there had to be 5% unemployment or 5.5% unemployment. It was ridiculous. I mean, I thought that happening then. And I thought, hey, this is ridiculous. We used to get upset if the unemployment went over 3%. What is this with these people accepting 5.5%? It's crazy.
That's nuts to me. That's wild.
At least it says it's a theory of creating policy to serve the society. Think about how the linguist sticks. And she says, the linguistics, under the realization of humanitarian policy, I'm not sure that, I'm not sure what that means, but Lisa also says, Joe, don't blame the accountants, please. I'm not blaming the accountants. I hope I wasn't giving the impression, I was blaming the accountants. The accounting system is actually perfectly logical. Money has to be created and money has to die. It's a very logical way of looking at things. I don't have any problem with that. I have problems with Wall Street. I have problems with the banks, but I don't have problems with the accountants.
I love that. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, we can tell who's the accountant here.
Right.
Amber says debits and credits. Debits and credits. Amber says, one of the reasons why MMT made so much sense to me because I worked as an automotive accountant for a while. Laura Fielding says, are people concerned that we will divert the focus away from educating the masses about MMT? Can we not hold both paradigms simultaneously, that Medicare for all, whether it passes federally or at the state level, saves money, that we can afford whatever we have the need for as a monetary sovereign? Yes, I'm wondering, is this something nefarious or another agenda? Is it just fear that we pull energy away from MMT, educating the masses? I don't know. I can't tell what their internal motives are. I'm no longer a part, of that group. When I was a part, of that group, nobody was expressing ideas then about how it wouldn't be possible to have a single payer at the state level. Okay, it's obviously true. There was one thing, though, that should be obvious to everybody. All of the Eurozone countries that don't have don't issue their own fiat currencies because they're using the Eurozone, and the European Central Bank now, they have no trouble at all having a Medicare for all system or something similar to that, and they cover the cost, and they don't go bankrupt in those countries, and they don't have people dying, because they don't have any insurance, and life is just far better because they're covered.
Who would have thought? That's a thing. You can actually do that.
Yeah, they are the proof that you can actually do that, even if you're not a currency issuer.
Right.
Even if you're not a currency issuer, like the people from RP, were complaining. But we look at the state comprehensive financial reports, and we found that on the average, the states were spending, were taxing at just about 103%, of what they were spending. So there was a very thin margin of 3.6%, and many states would fall under the margin. Like, for example, New York State would be at 99.3% of what they were taxing. So there was a little deficit in New York State, even though it was a wealthy state. And so they said, look how close they are to the margin, essentially accepting the idea that there somehow had to be a totally balanced budget at the state level. Let me tell you something. Everybody always complains about the austerity in the Eurozone. Well, guess what? That austerity has a criterion for the individual nations that they get to have deficits of 3%. They have their healthcare programs, and they're allowed to run deficits of 3%, even in that restrictive situation.
Wow.
And our MMT friends over at RP are saying that even when our states are running 103% as opposed to 97% as they are over in Europe, that somehow we can't afford what they can afford, specifically a single payer system at the state level. Right. So this is just, this doesn't make any sense. They're not really thinking it through. That's all I have to say about it. I just think they're not really thinking it through. Okay, now I don't think there are bad motives there, on the part of most of them. They just been convinced that this is a serious danger and that it would be a distraction from pushing for the national program if we also push for state programs. I, on the other hand, look at this entirely different way. I think if we have victories at the state level, that's going to strengthen the national movement. Okay.
No, I agree. I agree with that.
It's going to get people invigorated. It's going to put pressure on senators from the red states to support a national program, because people in those red states are going to be very envious that they don't have single payer in their states, and they're going to go after their damn senators. Now, maybe they can't go after their state legislatures because those are gerrymandered, and maybe they can't go after their governors okay, because those elections are fixed, but they can damn well go after their senators, I think. So Lotta says, the Fed balance sheets are available online. Mike Norman sells a course on this for about $100, I believe. Yeah, the Fed balance sheets that he's looking at are the daily Treasury statements. There is a daily Treasury statement published each day, and you can read it every day. By the way, that's one way in which the ideas of MMT are used in the private sector. People are looking at the daily Treasury statements, and based on trends in the daily Treasury statements, they're making decisions about what kinds of things to invest in. So they're making some profits off of MMT knowledge.
Right.
And so that is going on. Lisa says, Shareef, Congress holds the purse strings. Yes.
They do.
They do.
They definitely do.
Yeah, they do. And the donors hold Congress.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I wouldn't say that they hold. Okay. Let's say they hold the congressional jocks. How about that? The coin. Quite an image, isn't it? The coin, simply put, allows the government to credit its own account at the Fed equal to the face value of the coin. When the government spends, the Fed will then credit bank reserve accounts equal to the spending so that the payments will clear. That comment, was by Ellis Winningham, who is an excellent person, part of the MMT community, knows MMT inside out. And Sandy says, hi, Ellis. Yes, Ellis has been a favorite among many people in the MMT community for a long time. Jeff Denton says, neither party passes legislation. When they hold a majority, they always claim they're being obstructed somehow when they hold a majority. No, not the Republicans. When they hold a majority, they pass tax cuts for the rich.
Right.
So they don't say they're being obstructed at passing the tax cuts for the rich.
I would argue both sides do that, though. Both sides do tax cuts for the rich. I would argue both sides do that.
Yeah, but...
I mean, Republicans are worse, obviously, but...
Yeah. I think I entirely agree with that. Right. Then if they do get legislation passed, it always favors less than 1% of the population. That's quite true. And Lisa says, a political debt crisis boogeyman in practice, in red practice jerseys. Okay, Jeff has another comment here. I guess I'm not going to go over that one because... actually, there was nothing wrong with that comment. It looked like a perfectly good comment. It's just that we're running short of time.
Right.
At this point, we're about 2.5 hours in, and
it's crazy. Like, time flies by. Time flew by. Having a discussion with you.
Oh, thank you. Time flew by when I was having a discussion with you. So, okay. But Solana makes the comment, Australia tried to get rid of their debt and people had a fit. Yeah, that story is at some point in the history, I think it was in 1980, or 81, the Australian government actually paid off their debt. They paid off all their debt instruments. They were down to zero. And the reason why was Australia was running trade surpluses all the time. So they were getting dollars in, and they didn't have to do any deficit spending. And they paid off all their debts. And that didn't cause a recession, or anything like that there. But when they paid off all the debts, they took away this investment vehicle of the Treasury securities from the private sector. And that's what LATA means. The private sector people had a fit, pleaded with the Australian government to start to issue debt instruments again. Right. And the Australian government accommodated them, even though they had no need to issue the debt instruments. They had no need to borrow. They still did borrow because the private sector wanted it.
See, people with the money always can do that.
Yes, they can always do that sort of thing. Sandy Deck says, federal debt is different than household debt. Yeah, very, very different, because the federal government can always pay it back, always create the money it needs to pay it back.
Right.
Ella says, all spending must be approved by Congress, which is fulfilled by Treasury. The key point to understand is the Federal Reserve does not spend and cannot in the case of fiscal policy. It merely injects reserves to clear payments as Treasury spends. The Fed does conduct a monetary policy, but that's not spending, whether it be typical monetary policy or atypical, such as QE or NIRP. Ellis, I'm not sure what you mean by the NIRP. I know exactly what you mean but with respect to QE. But the important point here is that technically the Federal Reserve is not doing any net spending. It is swapping assets with the private sector that are supposedly, okay, of equal value. Okay. However, the Federal Reserve is not doing any mark-to-market calculations in order to evaluate the assets that the private sector is by claiming a particular value for. It's using book value. So in situations where the Fed is trading for assets, in other words, trading reserves for private assets, if the situation is such that the mark-to-market value of those private sector assets has gone down, but they're trading for the book value, okay, of the private sector assets, they're actually delivering not an accounting profit, but a real world profit to the private sector companies. And I believe a considerable amount of that went on during the QE periods, in the period from 2009 to 2012-13, and that it may still be going on but today. I've always suspected that. But I want to emphasize that what Ellis is saying here is exactly correct in terms of the legality of it. The Federal Reserve has no right to spend in such a way or to put money into the private sector in such a way that it increases the value, okay, of the assets of the private sector firm. It has no legal right to do that. That would be fiscal policy, and it's prohibited from doing that.
But it goes back to my point before earlier. I was saying Congress will say, "I need this," and they'll just get it.
Quite too often, that is true. Much too often. Okay, that is true. And in fact, it may be at this point in history just about true all the time, or very close to all the time.
Right.
And Lana says, please tell Shareef I will send a few videos to him on Twitter, Lana says.
Please do. Thank you, Lana. I love you.
I'm not sure which videos she's going to send, but I'm sure there'll be good ones. Ella says, keep in mind that Medicare for all will most likely be deflationary at the onset. If a tax is added on, it will contribute to a certain extent, okay, to the deflationary effect. The job guarantee can assist in this regard, because it will have a positive impact on output since it enhances the private sector. And yes, Ellis is quite right about that. And Jeff Kenton says, when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, before the political parties merged under the same donors, I don't remember ever hearing about homelessness except for people who chose that lifestyle. And there's no way in hell that it's a choice for anyone these days.
Wow, that's crazy.
That's very true, Jeff. There's no way it's a choice for anyone these days.
Wow.
And Lana says the job guarantee would severely reduce petty crime. I expect it would, Lana. I expect it would.
It would. It definitely would.
Jeffrey Denton points out when I was growing up, a gas station attendant could afford to buy a house. That's true.
What? That's crazy.
Yeah,
That's
but it was
crazy.
true. It was true.
That's crazy. And it's funny, like someone like my aunt who's like over the age of 65, like if you ask her about if you told her that, she was like, that's ridiculous.
Yep.
That's
But
nuts.
that's the way it was.
Wow.
That's the way it was. The early 60s were a good time to be living in this country, except for the war in Vietnam, of course.
Right.
That was not so much fun. We had very big armies, in Vietnam, but not as big as World War II,
Right.
but very, very sizable armies, and
Probably
a lot
not,
of people got hurt bad.
probably not as big as now either. Probably our army's probably even bigger.
No, our armies are smaller.
Really?
They are.
The reason why I'm saying that is because the amount of money we spend, I would assume that who we fighting,
Okay, so maybe 10 years ago, I started comparing how many people, were under arms, how many people, had been in the military, at various times. Certainly the peak was in World War II. We had about 15.5 million people under arms then.
Wow.
And our population was only half the size, of what it is now. So
Wow.
we had about 150 million people then. We have like 330 million people now. So we're more than twice as large now. So if we had an equivalently sized army now, it would be 36 million people, in the armed forces, in World War II. In the Korean War, it had fallen down to something like maybe 3 million, in the military. In that time, at the time of the Vietnam War, it had fallen down to, it was still maybe 3 million. I guess there were just about an equal number of people, in the armed forces. Then we went to a volunteer army after that. And the volunteer army became a so-called a professional army.
Mm-hmm.
And they made it more and more reliant on equipment, high-tech equipment, to enhance the killing productivity of the armed forces, as it were. And because of that, they were able to continuously reduce the size of the armed forces. The last time I checked that out, which was somewhere around 2010. I haven't really looked at the sizes since then. We were at something like 1.2 million people actually in the armed forces.
Right. I swear, I really swear that we're getting ready for extraterrestrial battle because there has to be some aliens out there because we have all these high tech gear. Like, why do we need this for? Who are we fighting?
Well, they will tell you that we need it because we have such a relatively small number of people, are in the armed forces. So those people have to be very productive. They'll probably tell you something like that. I don't talk to them much.
No,
I don't know what they're saying. I don't know what they're saying these days.
Oh, I can imagine.
I used to know because during the 1960s, I was hired by a defense think tank because they were afraid that peace was going to break out.
Mm-hmm.
It was at the time of the formation of the Arms Control Disarmament Agency that I don't even think is an agency of the federal government anymore. But it got started then, and this company was sure that it was a growth area for contracts. So they hired a few social scientists, and I was one of them, to try to increase the contracting base in the peace and disarmament area. And so that's how I got a job with them, and I was able to work alongside all of these defense type people who were interested in limited wars, in Asia, and that kind of thing. Okay, and I actually, at one point, I actually went over to Thailand because they were concerned about the insurgency, in Thailand.
Oh, wow.
And the Department of Defense people decided that they really needed to have some social scientists on their project. Okay, so DARPA got in somebody as a psychologist to head up the effort that they had in Thailand. And the psychologist was starting to insist that the defense contractors put in some social scientists who would understand, just a little bit about Thai culture, and the Thai people. So I got sort of sent over there for 3 weeks. Okay, it would have been a longer time, but actually my son, was a premature baby, and they asked me to go over there, at that time, and I said, no way. I am not taking my son over there. That is not going to happen. Wow. And so we negotiated, and we finally made a deal where I would go there for 3 weeks, get some on-the-spot experience, and come back to Buffalo and write a report. And so that's what I did.
I should next time I talk, I should talk some more about your history. That'd be interesting to talk about. You've seen a lot. Not only you know a lot, you've seen a lot.
Yeah, I've seen a bunch of stuff over the years, in different ways, because I started out, in the research world and also teaching. Then I moved into my own business, which was a computer business, mm-hmm. and was absolutely the wrong place for me, but I was still in it for a very long time. And then I went back this time into private research, into actually market research area, which was a very interesting experience for me. And I made my way from there into knowledge management.
I could totally see you in the research. I could see you as probably a research developed person. I could totally see that.
Yeah, I was well suited to that kind of thing, but I was actually even better suited to teaching. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, fairly early in my career during the 1970s, I was forced out of a teaching job because I am not the kind of person who can keep his mouth shut for very long. And so I'm afraid I antagonized some people. And along about the same time, the faculty world was kind of tightening up in terms of, of available jobs. I chose the wrong time to open my big mouth.
Right. So I don't blame you. I couldn't be a teacher, nor could I actually be in management. I'll be the worst person any corporation will want to hire to be a supervisor or manager.
That might be, but I don't know if I agree with you when it comes to teaching. I think you probably would have made a very good teacher.
Do you think so?
Well, I think so. You're very good at grasping things and putting things together, and also tying things together from different areas. Mm-hmm. And you are also very, very good at talking to people and putting things in a simple way for people. Mm-hmm. So I think you would have made a damn good teacher.
Mm-hmm. I'll think about that.
A damn good teacher at the university level is where I'm looking at it from that point of view.
Heard.
Okay. And if you're working a full-time job, you should be able to afford a decent way of life. Unfortunately, it's not that way in the U.S. Yes, but, by the way, there's an article that I haven't had a chance to treat in these talks. It was written actually by someone very unpopular with the MMT crowd, who is actually Matt Brunig. Okay, his name is. And he recently wrote an article about how people in Denmark got. Hi, Shareef.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
Neither do I. How people in Denmark actually forced the McDonald's company to pay them $22 an hour.
We gotta do that here.
Yeah, we got to do that here. But he explains how they did it there. And the way they did it there, of course, was through the power, okay, of unions.
Mm.
They eventually forced them to do that. Okay, and today, those are the kinds of wages they're paying over in Denmark, but of course, not here in the United States. So Ellis says the JG will work to reverse this sort of. Sorry, I scrolled past that too fast. I got to find that again. That is a good comment. Ellis's comments about the JG are always worthwhile. It says the JG will work to reverse this sort of stigma. That is a bottom-up approach. In sum, the JG will have the effect where skilled and professional jobs are demanded because the jobs of the unskilled are guaranteed. So total employment essentially rests on the shoulders of the bottom income distribution. Yes, I fully agree with that.
Right.
And that is one of the wonderful things about a JG program that we learn, okay, from MMT when we talk about it from the MMT point of view. Now, there are a number of JG proposals out there that are not MMT proposals. Okay, and they don't have many of the same kinds of concerns we've been talking about here tonight.
Yeah. Are they good? Are they good proposals?
Not by comparison with the MMT proposals, no.
Okay.
Not good proposals. In other words, they are proposals that would in fact be, I don't think they'd be quite the same thing as the kind of workfare stuff, okay, that applied in England, okay, at one point, but they are closer to that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they don't afford the same freedom for people to work at things they would want to work at for their communities, and they're not as serious about actually supplying, okay, a living wage with good fringe benefits as the MMT proposal is.
Mm-hmm.
So we have someone known as Jesus who says we should tax capital gains and no taxes, okay, on earned income. Earned income should only be removed via bond selling to working people. They produce the real goods and services. Well, of course, here we recognize taxes are not needed by the federal government but for revenue, but there are lots of other reasons to tax, and one of the most important reasons is so that people who are wealthy don't have a sufficient amount of wealth to undermine our democracy as they have been doing.
Right.
In other words, the preservation of a democracy is a very, very important reason to tax.
But when even if you tax them, when they still have the power to do whatever they do with that anyway, how would taxing them stop them?
It all depends on how heavily you tax them. If you make it impossible for billionaires to exist, that's going to cut down on a lot of corruption in the political system. But you really have to get serious about it.
Right.
You have to be confiscatory about it.
You
have to do it consciously, knowing they must know and you must know that it's because they've been a danger to democracy.
I would say taxing the rich heavily, and also to no offshore accounts.
I would say too, no offshore accounts, absolutely.
Yeah.
As well.
Right.
And Jesus makes some other comments. Karen Burke says, absolutely. I'm trying to catch up a little bit on our time here. Jesus says loans create deposits, not the other way around. Absolutely, Jesus, you're quite right.
Jesus knows.
Jeff Denton says, the way I see it when it comes to healthcare, Americans are being punished for allowing oligarchs to get together unbeknownst to them and completely lower their standard of living, so that they're literally being punished for not being able to afford the most expensive healthcare system on the planet, which, by the way, has no reason to be the most expensive healthcare system on the planet. There's no reason why our healthcare system should be any more expensive. Let's say the UK healthcare system, or the New Zealand healthcare system, or the Australia healthcare system, or the Canadian healthcare system, or maybe even the Taiwanese healthcare system, which, by the way, is a wonderful healthcare system.
Right.
That was modeled on our Medicare system, but it is a Medicare for all system, and it works extremely well and has controlled the pandemic there really wonderfully, even though they've lately had some problems with respect to the Delta variant. But after all, they have something like, what is it now, 40 fatalities per million, or 45 or so fatalities per million. And we have, I think we're getting close to 2,100 fatalities per million here. So, I mean, this is really ridiculous.
It kills me how like every other country figured out but us.
Well, not every other country figured out.
All the developed ones, the ones that actually have like a healthcare system.
Yeah, but a lot of the ones who are developed and who have good healthcare systems still have very high fatalities per million.
Sure, I don't doubt that.
Right, but I'm saying there are countries that have extremely low fatalities per million compared to ourselves. Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, China are 4 of those countries. But even Cuba, let's say, Cuba is way lower than we are in fatalities per million.
But all those countries have a national healthcare system.
They have either national healthcare systems, or Medicare for all system.
Well, right.
In Australia, it's much more like a Medicare for all system. In New Zealand, it's much more like a Medicare for all system. Cuba has National Health Service. UK has a National Health Service. Taiwan has a Medicare for all system.
Right.
Okay. Was there ever anything close to universal health care in the United States? The answer is no.
Never.
Never, never, never. Shane shows up at 11:30. What were you doing all the rest of this night, Shane? He says, hey, Joe. And he says, hey, Lana. And Lana says, love Ellis. And sends Ellis some hearts. If Ellis is still here. And Jeff says, you ask great questions, Shareef. And your thirst for knowledge, which is rare, made the time fly by. Yes, indeed. Indeed.
Thank you, guys. You guys are amazing.
And L. Stephen Day says Yarmouth and Yarmouth, on macro in cheese. I'll bet that's a very interesting story because John Yarmouth is talking MMT these days. Evelina says, I heard YY cousin had her tonsils out for free at Bellevue in New York in the early 60s. Laugh out loud. Well, I don't know how she had her tonsils out for free. At Bellevue, I'm not sure I understand that. I lived in New York. I was a resident of actually in New York until the early 60s, and but during that time, healthcare was not free. In fact, actually, my mother got cancer. At that time, it first occurred in 1958. Chemotherapy just was coming in. At that time, and they gave her chemo, kept her alive until 1961.
Mm.
But one of the effects of the whole experience, outside of the trauma for my father and the stress and the strain of the whole thing, it absolutely drove him into bankruptcy.
Right.
Medical bills. This was in the late 50s, in the early 60s. So No, there was never a universal health care system.
Wow.
So, yeah, maybe that's why I've always been for Medicare for all.
Right. I would say so. I mean, it's crazy to me too. Like, the idea of Medicare for all has been around for so long, and no one's pushed that hard. We've never been close. We've never been close to get it. Not. We haven't been close.
Well, I think we were a little close at one time. I don't think we were so far from it when Lyndon Johnson, he wasn't able to get a Medicare for all program through, but he was able to get the original Medicare program through and the Medicaid program through. And that wasn't that far from getting the whole thing through. If things had broken, a little differently, if even a few years later, if Nixon and Kennedy hadn't been fighting, they might have made a compromise, on Medicare for all back then, because the idea, of Medicare for all wasn't called that.
Right.
But the idea of extending Medicare to the whole population then was very popular. Ted Kennedy was for it, and Nixon was for it. Certainly after a fashion, for a while, there could have been a compromise made that would have been viable. Later, when Jimmy Carter came into office, again, a time for large majorities, for the Democrats in Congress. They could have passed the Medicare for all bill back then, and Teddy Kennedy wanted it. But Jimmy Carter was a little more hesitant, but he was kind of favorable to it too. But there was no way of getting Carter together with Kennedy. They were like cats and dogs.
If Carter, you think if Carter passed a Medicare for all system, you think he would have beat Reagan?
Absolutely, I think he would have beaten Reagan. Absolutely. If he had come to agreement with Teddy Kennedy and they had passed something, he would have beaten Reagan going away. That, he had to do that. The other thing that he had to do was refrain from appointing Paul Volcker as the chairperson of the Federal Reserve. Because Paul Volcker at first fed the inflation, and then he basically caused a depression. And that was in the final days of Carter's run. And boy, when those interest rates went up to 22%, at 23%, because the Federal Reserve, was trying to kill the inflation that it thought was due to government spending. Of course, it wasn't due to government spending. It was purely due to the Saudis, who were trying to, get more profits, from the oil. And they were basically fighting with us about that. Damn. I think if Carter had done those two things, he would have beaten Reagan, in 1980. And that would have been a great turning point for the United States, because Carter's energy program, his environmental programs, would have developed much, much earlier into climate programs. And we would never have gotten into the fix on the climate that we're in at this point. Carter had great programs going in the Department of Energy, and great programs going, in conservation. The other thing that was wrong with Carter was he didn't have the view on deficit spending he should have had. He was always trying to balance the budget. And it crippled him. He could have spent a lot more on those great programs if he was willing to do deficit spending at that time. He didn't understand the fiat currency at all. And from that point of view, he was bad. But boy, from the point of view, if he had had those little things changed in his background, he would have been a wonderful president, because he was a great guy. He really was, in terms of the kind of person, the kind of man he was. He was really an enviable person but he was in many ways a lousy politician,
Right.
and that was that. And he started fighting with the unions. I was tearing my hair out. This guy was fighting with the unions. I mean, a Democratic president is fighting with the frickin' unions. Anyway, that was those were very funny times. In fact, I go through the Carter administration a bit. In my first book on fiscal responsibility, I wrote 2 volumes on fiscal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
The first problem was about actually the progressives and their give up formula, their false ideas of fiscal responsibility. That's what that book was about. So part of what it covered was Jimmy Carter's administration. And Jeff Denton says, I'm sure that these other countries didn't have 250,000 to 440,000 accidental deaths in hospitals before the pandemic. That's right, they didn't.
Right.
That they've all been evidently taken care of now that there is a pandemic. Yeah. And Lana says, wow, Yarmouth is awesome. Yeah, Yarmouth has got a really good understanding, and in the next few days, that may prove to be very, very valuable because he may be the one to save the reconciliation bill in the House. And Sandy Degg said he still is a good man. Yes, Sandy, he still is a good man, and he's still there. He's still alive. He is miraculously still alive, and so is Rosalind. She's still alive, too. That's amazing, too, but she's really old also. Don't forget her. And Jeffrey says, there's no way of knowing just how any president might be leveraged or blackmailed or pressured into doing things. I'm sure Nixon was all too happy to admit about a break-in, and not that he purposely prolonged the Vietnam War to make it seem like he ended it.
Right.
Jeffrey, I think that comment is, if I can use a $1,000 word, I think that comment was very perspicacious.
Uh-oh.
Barney says, oh. And Sandy says, she is a good lady. Yeah, she really was a great lady, I thought. She's probably one of the only first ladies I liked since Eleanor Roosevelt. I liked Eleanor Roosevelt a lot. I really did. The only one I liked anywhere near as much was Rosalind Carter, actually. Anyway, I guess that brings us to the end of the comments. And Lisa says, imagine what life would be like if they did healthcare with Carter. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it came close if Teddy Kennedy could have stopped fighting with him. I think it was actually Teddy Kennedy's fault that the personal rivalry was too great there. And it wasn't really Carter's fault that he became the president and not but Teddy Kennedy. It was, simply the luck of the draw. After the Mary Jo Kopechne incident, it took a long time for Teddy Kennedy to get over that, okay, in terms of the public being willing to see him as a possible president of the United States. And by then, it was too late.
Right.
So, anyway, folks, I think it's time to end this. And Shareef, thank you.
This was really fun. We're gonna definitely do this again.
And thank you for a wonderful discussion, and we will definitely do this again.
Right.
Okay, and let's do it again soon, maybe sometime in the next 2 weeks or so.
No, I agree. I definitely agree with that. 2 weeks would be good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll figure out how to do that. And
I'm gonna think of some more questions. I'm gonna look through the book, see if I can figure out some stuff to ask you. Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah. Especially there was one thing you mentioned was public purpose.
Public purpose,
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that, especially because I think it relates to a lot of mutual aid. I think that's really important. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll be happy
Yeah.
to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
And Jeff says, thank you so much for this series, Joe. And you did a great job, Shareef. Yeah, I completely agree with that. You did a wonderful job. And Sandy says, Teddy was a womanizer. Yeah, I know. I know
Yeah.
he was a womanizer. But I still think he would have made a pretty good president, whether he was a womanizer or not.
You think Teddy Kennedy would have beat Nixon? I mean, not Nixon. Reagan.
Uh,
If he was president.
in 1980,
Yes.
if Teddy Kennedy had been nominated, in 1980, or Jimmy Carter had stepped aside for him, in 1980, he was at the height of his powers, and in many ways, at that time, he was a wonderful campaigner. He was extremely attractive. I think Reagan would have had his hands full, with Teddy Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
Completely. I don't think it would have been easy for Reagan to win at all. I don't really think that Reagan would have won. One important reason why not, but Teddy Kennedy was tight, with the unions. They would have gone all out for him, in 1980. And you wouldn't have had so many Reagan Democrats running over to the Republicans, because Teddy could have made them some promises. The unions were very angry at Carter, in 1980s, because he hadn't been a pro-union president. That was actually one of the reasons why Reagan was able to win, in 1980. So, yeah, I think maybe Teddy Kennedy in 1980 would have been a better matchup than Carter. But I also think that if Carter had changed a few things about his presidency and hadn't had the bad luck, of Iran and having the hostages captured there, that Carter probably could have won from Ronald Reagan also.
Right.
So, and then we wouldn't have had the whole neoliberal thing in the United States. It wouldn't have happened here.
Right.
So history would have been very much changed by then.
Very different. Very, very different.
So anyway, good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you, Joe. Thanks again. You're the man.
Okay. It was absolutely my pleasure, Shareef.
Absolutely.
I'll see you again soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Yes, Evelina, to answer your question, Reagan was anti-union. He certainly was. He broke the airline workers union strike in the early 1980s, and that launched us into the anti-union period here in the United States. And Dolores Pierce says yes, and I'm now going to say good night. I will see you on Saturday when I'm going to have Belia Perkle on and Rhonda Walker on. They are the people setting up, doing the main organizing for the special event in Washington on November 19th. And they're going to have a lot to say about that. They're going to tell you all about it. They're going to give all the wonderful details about it. That is going to be a terrific event, and the Red Berets are going to be up to their ears in it, and whole Washington will be up to their ears in it also. So anyway, good night, everybody, and I'll see you then.